just one single second.
I'd like to call to order the July 19th meeting of the Planning Commission. Victor, would you please say the lead us in the pledge tonight?
I pledge allegiance to
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Monette?
Here.
Commissioner Sweeney?
Present.
Vice Chair Koberstein?
Present.
Commissioner Parker?
Mrs. Parker had a death in the family today, so she will not be with us tonight.
Chairperson Kistner?
Here. Public forum. This is an opportunity for the public to address the commission on items of interest to the public that are not listed on the agenda. Because of restrictions imposed by the Brown Act, the commission may not engage in discussion or take action on matters not described on this agenda. Please observe the time limit of 3 minutes. Are there any speakers at public forum? All right, we'll close public forum. Consent items. Members of the commission or the public may ask that any items be considered individually for purposes of considering alternative action, for extended discussion, or for public comment. Unless this is done, one motion may be used to adopt all recommended actions.
I wanted to pull the minutes. There's something.
Would you turn your...
It's on. It's on, but it's not working? It's working. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, I wanted to pull the minutes.
Both sets?
No, just the June 21st.
Does anyone in the public want to pull anything? All right, may I have a motion on the minutes of July the 5th and the design review exemption of 2000 Howell Mountain Road? The applicant is Jeffrey Green.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Sweeney?
Yes.
Commissioner Monette?
Yes.
Vice Chair Koberstein?
Yes.
Chairperson Kistner?
Yes. Bobby, would you like to?
Yes, let's see, it's on page 4 of the minutes, if they were numbered. The motion says that Commissioner Monette moved that the Planning Commission add the word tourism to section 2.4. The motion was seconded by Commissioner Kistner. But then, as you can see below, Commissioner Kistner voted against it, and it should have been seconded by Commissioner Koberstein. So that's what I remember, and that's what makes sense. So
That's correct. That's what I remember
yeah,
too.
okay. That's all.
Sure, noted.
May I have a motion to approve the minutes as
So moved.
amended?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Monette?
Yes.
Vice Chair Koberstein?
Yes.
Commissioner Sweeney?
Yes.
Chairperson Kistner?
Yes. So we're already at item 6. This is the general plan revised draft EIR comment period description. And it's a public hearing to receive comments on the revised draft impact report. Does anyone wish to speak on this? You
Well,
wanna
yes,
do a staff
Mr.
report?
Chairman, Madam Chair, members of the commission, let me just do a very brief bit of background. This is a hearing to receive verbal comments on the general plan EIR. It's the revised or updated EIR that's being prepared for the city's new general plan. This is an optional hearing under state law. Essentially, it provides an opportunity for folks that don't want to submit or prefer not to submit written comments to provide verbal comments to the city. This is the second such hearing we've held in this regard, with the first hearing to receive verbal comments held essentially a month ago on June 21st. The comment period on the EIR closes next week on Monday, July 25th, and members of the public have up until that time to submit written comments on the EIR. So once again, the purpose of this hearing is to receive verbal comments on the environmental document. Staff or neither staff nor the commission will be responding to the comments at this meeting. We'll simply be noting the comments down, and they will be responded to as part of the final EIR process. Thank you.
Do we have any question from the commission? Is there any public comment on this? I guess we'll just close it. I don't need a motion on that, do I? All right, the next item is the design review of 2555 Main Street.
Going to discuss?
The applicant is Thomas
We're not going to
Benzel.
discuss that one?
I beg your pardon?
We're not going to discuss item 7?
That's what I'm doing right now.
Oh, okay. I mean, item, well, let's see. Yeah, I mean, we weren't going to discuss item 6 at all tonight.
It's just a listening session.
I
I
just
see.
asked.
So, okay, so what we are going to discuss that in the future? No, this is
Yes,
it.
I asked for comments, and no one out there commented, no one here asked any questions or
We
commented.
didn't have questions, but I thought you asked for questions first, and then I thought we were going to discuss after the public hearing was over. But if no one else,
There were no comments and we can't respond to them anyway.
so we can't just discuss this tonight on our own as what we've been looking at, right?
No.
No.
This is not a study session for the
All right.
draft EIR. It's
Okay.
state law encourages jurisdictions to have public hearings to allow a formal opportunity for the public to present their comments directly to the planning commission or the review authority. And this is the second public hearing intended to do that.
I see.
After the comment period closes, staff consolidates the comments and provides responses and brings back the EIR before the commission. If at that point the commission wishes to discuss the EIR, ask for further analysis, et cetera, that's the appropriate time frame.
Thank you.
Let me ask you this, Noah. Would you prefer to have the comments in writing from us, or would you prefer that we wait till the end?
Any comments that the commissioners have would be much appreciated. The earlier the better, so that gives staff the time to respond to them. If there are revisions that would be associated with that, then those can be discussed and presented when the entire document's brought back before the commission.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask what the projected dates are that this would happen?
Staff is hoping to bring the EIR and the general plan back before the commission at the second meeting of August. I believe that's the 17th. However, there's no way of knowing whether we'll be able to fully respond to all the comments until after Monday, which is the close of the period. So that's our ideal time frame, but it only gives us about 10 days to prepare the responses. If we get a large amount of comments, then we will not be able to meet that time frame. It'll push to sometime in September.
Have we received written comments, or you?
There has been limited comments provided. However, there is indication that there will be numerous lengthy comments provided in the very near future. And it's often the case that individuals commenting wait until the last day to fully vet and flush out their own comments.
Is it like out of order for us to ask to have copies of them once you start analyzing, especially if they're lengthy, so we have an opportunity to look at them more than the couple days between the packet and the meeting?
I can research that and talk to the city attorney about it. I wouldn't
Yeah.
want to make any procedural,
Right.
but so I'll look into that.
Okay, thanks.
My question is, you're not just talking about the EIR, you're also talking about the general plan update. Is that correct?
That's correct. So it's typical for staff to bring back the EIR and the general plan together for the commission's review, especially in this situation, given that we will have at this point had, I think, 5 study sessions with the commission on the general plan itself within recent months, 2 public hearings on the EIR itself. So yes, it's typical for staff to bring those back before the commission for action together. And in this situation, I would say it's particularly appropriate given the amount of time that has been spent analyzing and discussing the general plan.
So you would also like the general plan comments from us as soon as possible for you, or prior to coming back? Is that
Yeah, so today there's an item on the agenda which essentially summarizes all the comments
Right.
we've received from the commission. It's staff's expectation that all comments have been received from the commission up to now. So if there's additional comments, we would definitely appreciate getting them. That was the intent of the last 4 study sessions.
Okay, and we're going to do that tonight. We're going to discuss that tonight. Okay, thank you.
All right, the next item is design review of 255 Main Street. May I have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The project before the commission tonight is a minor design review, or I'm sorry, application for design review requesting to construct minor exterior modifications to the gatehouse structure, which is located on the CIA campus at 2555 Main Street. It's in the public, quasi-public zoning district and is also designated public, quasi-public by the general plan. Many people are familiar with the CIA Greystone facility. This is a small structure to the left as you enter, just behind the historic gate and stone wall. The project is essentially proposing to convert what's currently used as a demonstration kitchen and an event facility into a 50-seat restaurant, although you won't see any internal changes from the restaurant perspective as it currently functions as a restaurant for events. The minor improvements are primarily to the kitchen, although they do include 2 small additions totaling approximately 250 square feet. The gatehouse is an interesting building because the front or north-facing structure is historic, very historic, and then there was an addition constructed to the south side of the building, and these in recent time, I think around the late 90s, early 2000s. The applicants can correct me. 2006, thank you. And so these minor additions are being proposed to that portion of the structure. They were designed by an architect who's very familiar with historic projects and is a qualified architectural historian. Staff did not identify any issues regarding to potential impacts to the historic elements of the structure. As identified in the staff report, staff found the project consistent with all general plan, zoning, and design review criteria and is recommending approval. One interesting element is the project is conditioned that occupancy of the gatehouse as a restaurant cannot occur until the current restaurant at the Wine Spectator, that's called the Wine Spectator restaurant at the Greystone facility, is closed down. These changes are essentially an update to the kitchen facility. However, they will fit into the larger context of some of the operational changes that the CIA is currently undergoing, and there is actually a use permit and design review filed to expand and modify some of the uses for the Greystone facility. That's a separate project from this. However, it's worth noting that that application has been filed. That concludes staff's presentation. I'm available for questions, and the applicant is here as well.
Are there any questions of staff?
I had a question. Well, maybe it's not a staff, maybe it's the applicant, but I was just wondering if the walk-in refrigerator that's being proposed, that's new, there's no current walk-in refrigerator, and if so, I'm just curious if it's new, where the noisy part of it is going to be, and if you've thought of that, or if that might be an issue to neighbors, I'm not sure.
It shouldn't be an issue to neighbors. So currently it's being moved out from where it currently is. But the compressor for it is considered a remote compressor. It means it's not in with the unit. It actually sits on a pad outside. So it's been outside. So it's already been there. And just from a note on the demolition plan, it shows that area where the walk-in is going as a garbage area. That was just mislabeled. That actually is a storage room. The garbage is our garbage and trash receptacles are at the very north end of the campus, and our custodial staff clean that twice a day and bring it to that north end of campus.
Does the applicant have anything else to say?
So overall, this basically we're doing this just to make the kitchen itself a little bit more efficient. How it's laid out is the dish cleaning and dish machine area is almost in the kitchen itself, and so it becomes a really disruptive space. So what we're creating is a small bump out where the dish room will be separate from the kitchen itself, so that when there is a class or there is someone working within the kitchen itself, it's just a more efficient workspace. And that's really the only reason we're doing it.
Is there any public comment? Public comment is closed.
Can I ask a question of the applicant?
Certainly.
And I just have a question about the restaurant seats. The staff report says that the current Wine Spectator restaurant has 230 seats, right?
Yes, indoors and out.
Indoors and out, okay. I just want to raise this as an issue and see if any of the other commissioners feel we need to address it. The zoning ordinance appendix lists the Greystone at 125 restaurant seats. And this is an additional 50, although I understand they're sometimes used for restaurant purposes now, correct? The Gatehouse?
It's used for events.
Events. So periodically it's,
Periodically, and we use it for consulting projects. So it's kind of it's a multi-use space where there's cameras within the kitchen itself. So if we were doing research and development within the kitchen, people could be out in that area as well, watching on monitor and working.
Okay.
So it's more of a interactive space.
okay. Well, I would just like to propose that condition 12 in our resolution that does address the closing of the restaurant. It says that restaurant occupancy for the Gatehouse can't be granted until the restaurant is closed to ensure compliance with the water use efficiency and use guidelines. I would just like to add some language there, and also consistency with the cap on restaurant seats. I mean, it'll serve two functions. It'll make sure we're not suddenly having 280 seats over there, and it'll ensure compliance with the water use restrictions.
Isn't it going down, though, the 230 is going to be moved to, it's not going to be there at all, or am I misinterpreting?
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So they're only going to be 50, but you're thinking of, so there'll be 50 now.
All I'm saying is I wouldn't want to see the new space open as a restaurant for 50 seats before the other one closes. Or I think it raises, there should not be more than 125 seats over there, as I understand what's in our ordinance.
That number is, staff has no confidence in that number.
Well, why do we have them and why do we have caps? I don't think this isn't meant to penalize anybody. It's just meant to make sure that we're not knowingly exceeding an existing cap on restaurant seats without having considered the impacts of that.
I agree, and,
But isn't that just redundant? I mean, it's already stipulated that they can't open one.
right.
That's correct. And so Commissioner Koberstein is tying the occupancy to address more than one regulation that the city has. Staff supportive of the proposed change as it does tie together all the issues. However, staff is supportive of the change. It's more of a belt and suspenders approach, and it does identify how compliance will be met with multiple ordinances.
Oh, well, I think that's a good point, though. You don't have confidence in that number, but it seems that it should be cleared up. I mean, that's not what we're talking about tonight, but we need to look at that and make sure that we either change it or...
Well, at least we'll know there's 50 seats when everything is done.
I'd like to ask a question. I've been up there when you were serving lunch to the town folks up there, in which the Gatehouse was totally full of people, and you were still serving at Greystone. Are you still doing that? A couple years ago at lunchtime.
It may have been a private event that was in there that was.
No, it wasn't a private event. It was you had the students. The students were serving. They were cooking. You had one of the CIA chefs there, and you actually had a menu that we could select from, and it was very cheap. A lot of us went up there and ate a lot, and that's been several years ago. And I was just, you're not doing that anymore.
No, so that was part of what is the bakery cafe within the school itself.
That's right.
It was, when it was under construction, it was moved down to there, and when the construction was complete.
Yes, and you were using that as an educational tool, I believe. Yes.
Correct.
But I wouldn't want to tag those two things together, because typically, if I'm not mistaken, when you open to the community for part of the class portion, that is something that it's very nice for the community. And if we're going to start capping the number of attendees to link somehow to a restaurant seat, I don't want to blur those.
The Gatehouse is permitted to be used for events
Right.
and functions essentially as a restaurant.
Exactly. And many of those community events you're doing actually up in the kitchen, the main
Correct.
facility. So I don't think we should blur those at all. A for-profit seated restaurant is one thing where we have a restaurant cap, but I wouldn't want to start limiting your ability to outreach to the community. We all appreciate you doing that, and I think that would be a...
Yeah, I don't
really
that
limit
wasn't
it.
my intent.
That's
My
not the
intent was that there
intention.
were more people there on site between the two than there's going to be now.
Yeah, I mean, a restaurant use is something different than an event space. And I'm not trying to create an issue here, but I think that as long as we have caps on things, we should pay attention to them. And I'm fine if you want to say the cap, still stays at 125, because that's what they're reported as having. But it seemed like a simple thing to me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. We want to say what we mean.
Chuck Blybar, the attorney for the CIA. I just want to make sure we don't overlook a factor. When we received approval for doing the cafe, there was an amendment to the ordinance for the restaurant seating. So those seats, I don't want to inadvertently take those away. So if you have a 125 seat cap for the facility, then we will have sufficient between the cafe and the gatehouse.
Okay, see, that's a point I didn't understand. You'll still have cafe seats, and you'll have seats in the gatehouse,
That's correct.
correct?
Well, we've been talking
So
about
when
closing
we-
the wine spectator.
Right, so
Still
when you
anyway.
close the Greystone, you'll just eliminate those seats. And you'll
The
still,
not Greystone, but the wine spectator at the Greystone.
Right,
That
yes, I'm
restaurant
sorry.
on the north side that has
Okay.
the big deck.
and is 125, which is the reported number, is that an accurate?
That was actually only for the restaurant. And then we added 45 more for the cafe. So technically we were at 170, but there was actually, way back in 1993 when they did this, there was an idea that they would move, the seats were moving back and forth. There are 200 and some seats, but sometimes they'd be inside, sometimes they'd be outside. The overall capacity at any one time was probably 125.
Yeah,
We technically haven't exceeded that in the
and
Greystone.
I'm not trying to
Yeah.
cap your number. I'm just trying to say that we want to acknowledge that the seats in the Greystone are gone and are no longer part.
I actually thought the condition as written addressed that. It eliminated we could not open the Great House until the wine spectator was closed, and then we weren't getting into discussing where the cafe and those
Right.
other
Right.
issues.
Right.
Just as long as we don't lose track of we have activity
Yeah.
going on other than in the gatehouse.
That condition, as it's written, is for assuring compliance with water efficiency requirements, and I'm just trying to broaden it a little to also insurance compliance with our restaurant seat cap restrictions.
I saw it as functionally doing the same. But you can't occupy it till you close down that restaurant, so you're doing the same thing. Those seats aren't going to move anywhere else. But whatever the language that addresses that, as long as we don't forget the cafe. And we don't forget the idea that special events, private events, that's not restaurant activity. We do those in a number of places in the building. Thank you.
So the cap, does the cap have anything to do with the water use? Or are those two different things?
So
This is-
the CIA is allowed X amount of restaurant seats,
yeah.
and they're allowed X amount of water use. So the condition is written, and as amended by the commission, will say they cannot occupy the gatehouse as a restaurant until the wine spectator restaurant closes to facilitate both the restaurant seat issue and the water neutrality issue.
Okay, but I guess I might be, and I'll drop it after. I might just be extra dumb tonight. But if there are special events, they're not counted as restaurants. So you could have more people at a special event there.
100%.
But if it's tied to the water use, then what about that water use? I mean, I didn't know if the two are tied together or what.
They are not tied together, and CIA is approved to have events on site.
Okay. And they're approved to use the water.
Currently, that's correct.
All right. Okay, thanks. Just wanted that clarified.
Any more comments? Do I have a motion?
Let's see. How do we do it? Let's see. I move that we determined that the project is exempt from the requirements of CEQA under Section 15301 and therefore qualifies for a Class 1 categorical exemption, and that we accept the required design criteria and approve the design review for the proposed addition to the gatehouse structure at the CIA Greystone facility. Do I need to mention any other, pardon? As amended. Okay, yeah.
I have a second.
Second.
Roll call.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Commissioner Sweeney,
Yes.
Vice Chair Koberstein,
Yes.
Chairperson Kisner.
Yes. Our next item is an appeal of the administrative determination of the Sportigo retail store meets the definition of a clothing store and therefore requires approval of a use permit to occupy 1380 Main Street, located within the Central Business Zoning District. Staff report, please.
Sure. So as you'll remember, staff formally or previously brought back an administrative determination that was made on June 17th at the last meeting to notify the commission that staff had determined Sportigo as a clothing store. That determination has been appealed, and so that appeal is before the commission tonight. As identified in the staff report, the determination was based on the applicant's description of their use as a clothing store, a lack of definition of clothing stores or sporting goods stores in the zoning code, some other information provided by the applicants, and then past direction from the Planning Commission for strict interpretation of the zoning code. On June 22nd, the applicants appealed that determination. They provided some definitions of sporting goods stores or of a sporting goods store, which staff further researched and included in the staff report, and provided a definition of a clothing store from the same website. It's essentially a website that does provide definitions for land use. So it seemed like a good location for a definition, especially given that our code doesn't have one. There was some other supplemental information to support their appeal. They have a list of their inventory, some photographs of other sporting goods stores, and some of their own inventory displays. And staff has received numerous letters of support for the appeal. Staff did research past action at the site. There was no use permit for Sportigo previously, and the last use that appeared to occupy the space that Sportigo now is in seemed to be a winery for the entire building. So staff is purely speculating, but the determination could have been made that Sportigo was a less intense use than the previous winery and allowed to operate as a continuing use, or it could have been made that they were a sporting goods store. There's no record of that determination, so staff didn't have that. Other than that, the applicants are here, and they're here to present their position, and that concludes staff's presentation.
Are there any questions of staff? Would the applicant like to speak? Please.
Thank you.
Would you please state your name?
Sure. Aaron Trumbull.
And Christine Patrick.
This isn't the first time that we've discussed this, and now that you've had a chance to look over the paperwork that we turned in with our appeal, we first wanted to start to see if you had any questions for us that we might be able to answer now that you've seen all that information.
Any questions of the applicant?
Yeah, I just want you to reconfirm, because we talked about a lot of things last time you were here. When did you first occupy the space, do you think?
June 1993.
93?
Oh,
Okay.
no, might have been March.
Okay, but
late
it was
February. I think
1993?
The lease
Okay.
is dated March 1st, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, and last time you were here, you talked about the markets that you go to purchase your merchandise. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So we go to Outdoor Retailer Show. It's twice a year in Salt Lake City, and it is the primary show for buying for people like REI. Dick's Sporting Goods will go there. It is all of the outdoor running, kayaking, stand-up paddleboarding, fly fishing. That is the store where people like us go to buy our stuff. It's not a show like Mario's would go to in New York. It's not the fashion shows that other traditional clothing stores would go to.
Thank you.
Would you speak into the microphone so that the people at home can hear you, please? Thank you. Any other questions? I'm going to open public comment. Do we have some public comment tonight? None? I'll close public comment. Bobby, would you like to start the discussion? Please.
I have a lot of things here. I'll try to go quickly. Okay, so I looked up definitions too of sporting goods store. Thank you. Thank you. I looked up sporting goods stores, and I got the same definition that you do. It's a retail space devoted to any kind or variety of equipment, gear, clothing, and other goods related to sports, sport contests, exercise, fitness, athletic activity, and or outdoor recreation in general, Equipment and clothes that are used in sports, that's from Cambridge Business English Dictionary. Retail space specializing in equipment, gear, and clothing used in sports and athletic activities. And this was from the industry report. They also mentioned, interestingly, that businesses used to carry hardline and softline together. And I know you mentioned that last time, that you had hardline goods, which are the tents and the fishing nets and that sort of thing. And the softline is the clothing. And the fact that you guys order hardline, I mean, to me, you are a resource for the hardline equipment for sporting that no other clothing store in town is. So, I mean, to me, it means that you are a sporting goods store. Let's see. Over the past 5 years, this was from the industry report too. The sporting goods stores industry benefited from growth in the sports participation rate, which has stimulated demand for athletic apparel, footwear, more than the hard stuff. So I thought that was interesting because you mentioned that that's what you did to adapt to the changing market. Hardline and softline members alike are typically affected by broader economic factors, which in many cases have some bearing on stock performance. That's a quote from that thing. So also there was significant public support to support this appeal. Under, a little more technically, under the general provision in 17.168.020 on page 483 of our zoning ordinances, these were the reasons that you would want to have a use permit and wouldn't want to just have it happen. That the uses which require use permit approval have been determined to have a special character that makes their establishment as a permitted or accessory use without prior review impractical and undesirable. I don't think that applies to this situation. That the review shall be for the purpose of determining that each proposed use is and will continue to be compatible with surrounding existing and planned uses. I think that's already established. I don't think we need to find anything more. I don't think we need a use permit for that. And it's also for the purpose of establishing special conditions as may be necessary to ensure the harmonious integration and compatibility of uses in the neighborhood and with surrounding areas. And I think, again, that's already been established. So at least those reasons to call for a use permit I did not find to be adequate or compelling. So personally, I would support upholding this appeal.
Mary?
Yeah, I have a couple things to add. I think the start of this analysis by the staff was great. You don't have a definition, so what do? You try to understand the plain meaning of the term, which reminds me a little bit of our whole brewery issue. And I think we almost could have stopped there. I mean, when I look at those definitions, it's pretty clear to me what's clothing and what's sporting goods. But I understand you had received information from the applicant, and you're, concerned about the call that you might make. I would only say I think you have to look at the totality of everything, all the information they give you, plus everything that's in the ordinance, and that no specific thing they say is necessarily should be determinative of your decision, although it might be. In terms of the ordinance, in addition to what Commissioner Monette raised, I found two other things useful. I think I think you mentioned at the last meeting, Noah, that it's kind of odd that we have a sporting goods store as a permitted use here, and we have a clothing store as a conditional use, where you would maybe anticipate that the impacts of a sporting goods store are much more. What I find helpful in that regard is when you go to this district, it does not allow formula businesses. And so you might think of Dick's Sporting Goods or whoever's fly fishing or whatever. That can't be what sporting goods means here, because those kind of things aren't permitted. So to me, it tells me that when sporting goods was inserted in our zoning ordinance, people had in mind a smaller scale kind of operation. Certainly, the definition doesn't encompass a big box store. That could never happen. And one thing I find curious about our ordinance, in addition to what you mentioned, is some of the uses that you do see. And seeing that this goes back to 1993, you know, when I look at a list and I see some very specific things like an auto supply store in the central business district, very specific regulations about bicycle storage, specifically permitting a Chamber of Commerce office, specifically a mortgage company, a title company, sporting goods. I'm only surmising that maybe at that time, a lot of these uses were here. And the idea was to make them permitted uses, which is why I was so interested in finding out how long Sportigo has been here. And I think they said at the time they were basically the only operation in town providing the kinds of goods and services that they did. So, you know, it may be a big leap, but that could be a reason why they also have no use permit, because they may have been considered a permitted use. But for me, in the end, you have to look at everything. And when I hear what they say about how they run their business and where they procure their goods, and the letters that we have from residents regarding the type of equipment they're able to purchase through them, I think they are absolutely a sporting goods store within the meaning of our ordinance. And the only other thing I would say is that this whole case dismays me a little bit, because it's, to me, an example, not personally to the staff, but where our fee structure provides incentives and disincentives for people to do things or act certain ways, and in this case may have inhibited the applicant from going one way or the other immediately. I don't know, maybe you can address that, but for a local business to move from one place in town to another, even if it took a use permit, it just seems to me to be a hefty price to pay. So I would also vote to grant the appeal.
You're up.
Yeah, I support and have for all the above reasons.
And I agree. I will say that the February email, I think, is what really caused the problem. And so I would agree that the planning director at that point made the correct decision. But I think we've worked it out. And I have already asked the planning director that if we could look at that portion of the ordinance. I think I sent him an email the next day. For the future, I think that we need to look at the whole thing at uses and the conditional permits. So I would be very happy to support this. Is there anything else, or do I have a motion?
I move to uphold the appeal. What? How do you say it? Granting the appeal? Okay.
Second.
I move to grant the appeal.
Senya, may we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Vice Chair Koberstein,
Yes.
Commissioner Sweeney,
Yes.
Chair Kistner.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your time.
I would like to say that I have never seen so many emails, and I finally got tired of sending them to the planning director, so you didn't get all of them. But I'm glad you all participated. Thanks a lot.
It was a great cheer, a coordinated, connected cheer for.
I think there were over
wonderful
40 of them before we were through, and I think I gave up with you about 30. All right. I'm going to let them leave before we continue. I hope you all come back again. Thank you. Our next item is the summary of the Planning Commission direction on the general plan. Victor?
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the commission. This is the fifth, it's amazing it's been that many already, study session of the Planning Commission on the general plan since the April version of the general plan, the newest version, was released. A key focus, maybe the primary focus of the study session, is for the commission to review the commission's direction that they provided in relation to the general plan. Essentially, an initial summary of that direction was provided for the June 21st commission meeting, and then based on discussion from commissioners at that June 21st meeting, staff updated that direction and included that in the staff report. So one of the key items here for the commission to weigh in on is simply to look at those items and verify or indicate whether those truly or accurately represent the commission's direction. Just like to note that in reviewing the tapes of the meeting, not to say that the meeting wasn't crystal clear, but there was some discussion of issues, and then there's kind of a summary. And I think what was a little unclear from a staff standpoint is items that maybe were discussed initially, but maybe not included in the summary at the end. But it's my sense the commission probably wanted to include those in the list. And those two items, the two that come to mind, one had to do, it's more of a technical issue, but with policy ES1F and page 311, which was the issue raised by Mr. George David, where the language is worded in such a way that it appears to advocate allowing hotel uses within residential zones, and I believe the direction of the discussion was to modify the wording to make it clear that hotels, motels were not encouraged in those zones. That the intent of the language, I believe, was to include housing or workforce housing for hotel uses within those residential designations. And another issue that was discussed by the commission had to do with the lack of clarity, I believe, on the question of chain stores, and the commission wanting some clarity on that. Those two items are not in the list, but obviously those are two that the commission may wish to add along with others. I'd also like to note that in the staff report, we've included a summary of all the comments received to date. Notable really are comments received essentially from the June 21st meeting. We received some from Mary, the housing advocate, and Mr. George David, essentially summarizing the comments he had spoken to or about at the June 21st meeting. So really, this is a study session item. Technically, it's not a public hearing, but it'd be appropriate for the commission to hear from the public. From a staff standpoint, what we're recommending is the commission provide some feedback on those comments provided in the staff report to indicate, verify as to whether they accurately reflect the commission's direction on the plan. As noted by Noah earlier in this meeting, we're looking at bringing the general plan as a whole, along with the EIR, to the commission in the second meeting, tentatively in the second meeting of August 16th. So clearly we would be including those comments. These comments are the comments that we hear from the commission tonight as part of what we'll be returning to the commission with. And then obviously if the commission has any comments about the comments received. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Just questions, not discussion at this point. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Bobby, I can't hear you sometimes.
I'm sorry. I just was asking. This is not the time to discuss. This is just for questions.
That's correct.
Okay. So.
Right. I mean, typically this part would be if the commission has any questions of what's in the staff report, et cetera, and then once we're past that, then get into a discussion.
No questions?
It just seems like I'll ask the question. Okay, on number 8. Well, I think this is discussion. I don't think it's.
Do we have any public comment? All right, then I think I would like to start the discussion with, I will tell you that I've spent the last 3 days and I've gone through all the tapes from April 9th through last meeting. And I worked with Vice Chair Koberstein, and we put a summary together of what we felt that we heard in the tapes and what we heard from the group. And this is not really a discussion item, but I would like, it is long. I think there's a couple copies there if anybody wants them. Before I start, though, I would like to thank all three groups that really came. I would like to spend the CV group. I'd like to commend our town group, and I'd also like to commend, who's the other group?
George David.
George David's group, and I don't think he's a no. In his comments, though, he said he and his neighbors. So, but I don't know what they're calling themselves. So I would like to commend all of them for the time and the effort they put into doing this. I think we need a lot more of that, not just on the general plan, but on all the things we discussed. This will take a little while for me to read, but I would like to read it unless someone has some objections. And we tried to put the items that Victor put in the staff report into where we think they belong in the general plan. If anyone has any objections, that's fine. But we just felt that we should do this. So Chapter 1, we would recommend as follows. A periodic updating, which is number 5 on his list. The following new section should be added to the introduction to underscore the importance of the regular updates up to the general plan. A periodic review and updates to the general plan by the city. For the general plan to be truly effective over the full 20-year period to its horizon year of 2035, the St. Helena general plan needs to be reviewed and updated by the city on a regular basis. State planning law specifies that April 1st of each year, an annual report should be prepared on the general plan by the city and presented to the legislative body, which for St. Helena is the city council. At a minimum, the following issues need to be addressed as part of this review. Number 1, address the current status of the general plan and evaluate the progress made in implementing the various provisions of the plan. Number 2, focus on the city's progress in meeting its regional housing needs, including actions taken by the city and others to facilitate the construction of housing. 3, the degree to which the general plan complies with the most current state general plan guidelines. While the preceding 3 items comprise the minimum scope of an annual review of the general plan, the city has the discretion to add any other items to the review process as the city sees fit. In order to determine the administrative requirements and scope of the annual general plan review, the city staff, within 6 months of the adoption of the general plan, subject to the prior review and recommendation of the Planning Commission, shall bring to the City Council an agenda item presenting a process to implement an annual review of the general plan. This agenda item would include a recommended list of topics to address in the annual review. Each year, as a part of the annual general plan review process, the City Council will provide direction to staff on the topics to be addressed as part of the review for the upcoming year. Our comments are that the Planning Commission initiated this concept at its full study session in the general plan. Regular updating is a mandated important mechanism to be maintaining the relevance of the general plan. Quarterly review of the specific issues may be warranted. In Chapter 2, the land use and growth management element, we felt that a deletion of low, medium density land use, item 1 on staff list, the general plan should be adopted without the proposed low, medium density land use designation. The new designation is a recently introduced significant shift from the fully vetted 2010 draft general plan, which, by the way, was approved by the Planning Commission in 2010. The new designation has not been fully analyzed or examined by this community. Deleting it from the general plan will assist in achieving proposed adoption of the general plan within the scheduled timeline. Our comment essentially through this recommendation, the Planning Commission urges the City Council to adopt project alternative 2 in the draft EIR, no low medium land use designation alternative. The Commission received lengthy written comment from our town, St. Helena, and George David in opposition to the inclusion of the low medium density land use district, both of which are attached to this recommendation. In the case of OTSH, stated opposition is based on inconsistency with the housing element, negative impact on the ability to provide local workforce housing in the coming year, and an inadequate community input and staff analysis. See June 21st, 2016, OTSH letter to Noah Hausch and Victor Carnelio. See also a written statement of George David submitted for the July 19, 2016 Planning Commission meeting, stating that the proposed low-medium density land use designation does not anticipate long-term impacts of this challenge on the city, and urging instead that the city initiate comprehensive reform of all land within the city. B, comprehensive zoning review. Item 2 on the staff list. A new section should be added to this element to require a comprehensive review and analysis of the city's zoning district regulations. This new section might take the form of a policy and implementing action. Within 3 months, this is for you, Bobby, of the adoption of the general plan, initiate a comprehensive review of all zoning districts in the general plan and zoning ordinance. Particular emphasis should be placed on the analysis of the compatibility of existing regulations with the built environment and the utility of new or modified regulations to better achieve general plan objectives. Recommendations regarding revised or newly proposed districts, language in the general plan, and implementing regulations in the zoning ordinance would be the result of this process. Our comments are: the Planning Commission recommends the inclusion of this concept, whether or not the low-medium density land use designation is included in the adopted general plan. The Commission received comments during the review process directed toward regulations in residential districts other than the existing medium-density district, and comments on the proposed mixed-use district, suggesting that more comprehensive approach to zoning throughout the city, and in particular along the Route 29 corridor, is warranted. The general plan includes a mixed-use district that has a great potential but needs further study and development. This concept is not duplicative of the general updating recommended in Chapter 1 above. See in particular George David's comments, Planning Commission, July 19, 2016. C, managing tourism, item 6 on the staff list. The following underlined language is recommended to be added to the goals section in section 2.4. Manage growth and maintain community character. St. Helena is committed to preserving its existing community character, maintaining agricultural lands, managing growth and tourism, and ensuring that adequate infrastructure and facilities are provided. Our comments are: this recommendation is based on recognition that the city must manage the growth and change brought by tourism. As such, managing tourism rises to the level of importance of managing growth in the maintenance of community character. The Chamber of Commerce and others supported inclusion of this language in the general plan. The Planning Commission received numerous comments on tourism, and the Commission recommendations on these specific concerns are set forth below in Chapter 3, Economic Sustainability Element. D, wineries, item 3 on the staff list, revised. The following language should be added to policy LU 5.6. Permitted wineries and other agricultural related industries to locate in the city if their location does not adversely impact surrounding uses or city services, water, traffic, etc., or the quality and character of the community. As part of the comprehensive zoning ordinance update following the adoption of the general plan, distinct functions and uses, accessories to wineries, event centers, production facilities, tasting rooms, for example, should be recognized and categorized as appropriate or not to each land district in which wineries are allowed as a permitted or conditional use permit. Comment, the commission discussed citizens' voices comments concerning winery operations, locations at a study session on July the 7th, 2016. June 7th, excuse me. The consensus was that concerns about the future location of winery operations within the city should be resolved by tailored, permitted, and conditional use winery definitions that are appropriate for each zoning district. E, OTSH Land Use Comment 624-2016. Comments. Policy LU26 concerns concerns allowing higher density housing in specific residential districts subject to specific criteria. If the low medium density land use designation is adopted in the plan to avoid concentration of such housing in limited areas of the city, this policy should be removed or modified to include the low medium density district. In Chapter 3, Economic Sustainability Element, Citizens' Voice Comments on Tourism, Item 4 on the staff's list. Citizens' Voices submitted comments to the Planning Commission recommending changes in the economic stability element, directed primarily at assessing impacts related to tourism. See attached comments. It is the consensus of the Planning Commission that several of the comments in the Citizens' Voice letter dated April 15th, 2016, as redlined in materials presented May 17th, have merit, and that the City Council should evaluate them with respect to specific word changes in the plan. The Planning Commission formulated this recommendation after it considered the Citizens' Voice April 15th, 2016 letter, copy attached, at a study session on April 19th, 2016. Subsequently, the staff brought the issue back to the Planning Commission for further discussion on May 17th, 2016. At that time, the Planning Commission reviewed specific redlined recommendations attached hereto and reached consensus on some of these items. When further item-by-item discussion of the tourism issue was initiated in June, Citizens' Voices requested that the Planning Commission forward the April 15th, 2016 letter and redline changes in their entirety directly to the City Council for consideration and action. B, consensus regarding Citizens' Voice comments, Item 7, and additional items not included in the initial staff recommendations. During discussion of the Citizens' Voices comments, the Planning Commission did reach consensus on the following three concepts and recommends consideration and or inclusion of them as a council considers the Citizens' Voices recommendation. ES3E, the Planning Commission supports the concept of requiring a cost-benefit analysis for development projects in order to assist the city in measuring their impact on the community. Comment, the concept is an important planning tool. In any specific case, the city would establish the scope of review and retain the consultant to prepare the study. The project developer should fund the cost of this work. ES1B, ES2A. These implementing actions are concerned in part with the concepts of local serving uses and chain retail stores. The Planning Commission recommends that the concepts of local serving uses and chain stores be further developed through the definitions that recognize and support businesses that have a vested interest in the community. The Planning Commission supports inclusion of policy language in the general plan that recognizes the importance of business retention and the need to support an ongoing provider in the community. Comment, we all value our local businesses. Defining them as owned or staffed by community residents or consisting of non-chain stores may not provide a broad enough workable solution. The concept of businesses with a vested interest in the community can encompass local ownership, local management, established history, and still allow for businesses that are not changed but may have multiple outlets in the valley. To the extent feasible, city regulation should should support, not thwart, local business retention. C, various sustainable tourism goals, in part, staff item 8. Add language to the general plan that sets forth criteria for review and evaluation of proposed lodging uses, specifically hotels and other such uses, but excluding short-term rentals. Comment. The Citizens' Voice and George David submitted comments on policy ES23 and ES22. The Commission supports policy ES22 and implementing action ES2B that address the removal of caps on hotel rooms and, in the cases of ES22, restaurant seats. Hotel use is a hot topic with respect to revenue generation and community character. Policy ES22 already requires visitor serving uses to be oriented toward an upscale market and discourages development directed at mass tourism. Some have urged, and the city may wish to include more specific language in the general plan to elaborate on the desired nature of lodging uses. The Commission recommends that ES2.2 be left in its present form. Various sustainable tourism implementing actions. Modify the language in implementing action ES1F as follows. Provide development incentives for new visitors serving businesses to develop affordable and workforce housing, either through the construction of housing or payment of an appropriate in lieu fee to develop housing in the medium density residential or higher density residential. And we'd like to strike elsewhere in the city. Such incentives shall include visitors serving uses. And those are our comments. We have one more. As drafted, this implementing action appears to support development of visitor serving uses in the referenced buildings. That's our presentation.
Wow, it's a lot of work. That's great. I had worked on this by myself. Is that all right if I
Yep.
throw some stuff out and see
Go
what
right
you
ahead.
think?
Comments to this first before we
Sure.
jump in?
Oh, okay.
I would just like to clarify, I know you did listen to the tape, but I do believe when you mentioned that the Chamber of Commerce supports, they're not opposed to, they don't support. I think that's a big difference in the phrasing there. They believe the language is fine as it is, but I think you can get away with saying they don't oppose it. And I think that that's a nuance that we should be respectful of. It's,
Right.
I believe it's in there first.
What page are you on?
Which page is it on?
Yeah,
It's on managed tourism.
Which page?
It's your page 3. And it says the Chamber of Commerce and others supported inclusion of this language. They did not oppose it. And they, that's a very
Yep.
important difference. They wanted the language to stay the way it was.
Is it at the top, in the middle? Can you?
It's in the comment section, so it's
Below C.
Grace's
Below
summary
C.
of what we're saying. Oh, wait. These were not
Okay, the general
unanimously voted on, but these were,
Okay, but they're not opposed to.
that's a big
Yeah.
difference.
Yeah.
Supporting and not opposed, I believe, are quite different.
Commissioner Sweeney, is your mic on?
Oh, I'm sorry, probably not. Lost track. What I was saying is going back through, just making a clarification, because this is being written in a way that it projects itself to be a summary and kind of in agreement. And so I wanted to clarify that the Chamber, since we're speaking for the Chamber of Commerce here, the sentence in in the comment that the chair and vice chair put together says that the Chamber of Commerce and others support inclusion of this language, meaning managed tourism, and the Chamber of Commerce and others, myself included in the others, were not opposed to, but do not support. So that's a very different comment.
I was thinking too on page 1 of this. I like the comment that it says quarterly review of specific issues may be warranted, but I'm thinking maybe that should be in the main body of the comment, that, up to 4 a year as needed can be, rather than just talking about the once a year. Because in the, in the underlying portion, now the underlying portion is what? So the underlined portion is what in the comment, or is the underlined portion?
Your proposed,
you guys
it's what you're
wrote-
proposing, actually phrasing.
It's actually Victor's language. The shorthand list that the staff provided just
Okay.
simply referenced his language, so
Okay.
this is his language. So if
So
I
you're-
understand you, you're saying this language, the body of the language, not just the commentary,
Yeah,
should talk
yeah.
about quarterly
Yeah.
review of specific issues?
Yes, that as needed up to 4 times a year. I guess it's 4. I'm not sure if there's a limit. Is there a limit?
Yes.
Typically, you wouldn't want to be amending your constitution. The intent is to limit the opportunities to amend essentially the land use constitution for the city. 4 is I would say a typical number for jurisdictions.
Okay, so, I mean, you could just say, 1 a year, and I like what the comment says, a quarterly review if necessary, but I think that should be in the body of it.
Yeah, I thought when we discussed that, I wasn't sure if we were talking about tackling a topic at a time quarterly and then pulling it all together in an annual summary, or if we were talking what we were doing.
So usually, how general plan amendments can be initiated by the public or by internally by the planning commission or the planning department or the city council. And so, having a regular schedule of when those are heard essentially funnels all of the staff work associated with general plan amendments to certain target dates. So say an applicant has a proposal to modify the general plan, we would say, well, you're going to be heard on one of these 4 dates. Staff initiated ones, commission initiated ones could go on those same dates, or they could be pushed to separate dates. But it's kind of sets an anticipated schedule for the review of the general plan, and it's not intended to. Typically, it's not intended as a looking back at the general plan. It's not an opportunity, or often an opportunity to do a comprehensive review. It's a very targeted, focused review of a specific amendment to the general plan is often how that's used.
But it could
And
be.
I think that's the way it should be handled. I really think that's the way it should be handled, and I think that's why we wrote it the way we did. So, and I think that it would be done at not just our discretion, but at the public's discretion, or if the city council wanted us to look at something, then I think that and I think that's the way why it was written that way.
I think it should be as flexible as possible, as open and flexible as possible, not more than 4. I don't mean, every 3 weeks. or
Well, you
anything,
can't do
but
it 4 times.
Given
more than-
given a up to quarterly, that it should be flexible for whatever is needed, because you can't anticipate. I don't think we should put restrictions on what could be what these here, what could precipitate.
Having no
a
numbers
hearing.
actually is better then, by saying at least once a year.
Right, but I
Leaves it
think
pretty open-ended, because
put
otherwise it starts
that-
becoming onerous and we won't do it.
the
and then
way it's worded,
Right.
it seems like it's once a year, and I think that there should be wording in the body that says.
It says
this-
at least once a year, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it doesn't say quarter. That it could be up to quarterly, up to 4 times a year, or something like that, or just what you say. Quarterly reviews might be as specific as may be warranted. So I
And
think
if I could add, I think the intent is the at least once a year. I mean, right now the city's never done this, and I mean, just to be sure the city does it annually, I think would be not a minor victory. And
Victor, I hate to I hate to correct you. However, we did it once when the mayor was the chair of the planning commission. We did it one January.
oh, good, okay, so I miss.
But if
Many
I
years
miss.
ago.
I
But putting
misspoke.
a bar too high, then
It's not
we
putting-
start
it's not-
coming, all you're doing is talking about things without letting them actually
but
take
it's
action.
not. If this is something that is, as a matter of fact, a possibility.
No,
And-
just to clarify, I'm sorry not to interrupt, but just to clarify, state law says you can amend your general plan at most 4 times a year. So and usually that's driven by people in the community wanting to amend your plan. So it's a maximum of 4. I don't think anybody's intended, or anybody out there in the state reviews their general plan with an idea of some regular review on a quarterly basis. So I to my mind, and particularly given limited staff and all of that, I think saying at a minimum would cover it. Then, if more is needed, more can happen. But saying quarterly, basically, it does, to me, my mind, create an odd expectation, and also mixes up the 4 times a year with the 4 times maximum number of times you can amend the general plan per year. So just as a matter of simplicity and practicality, I think saying a minimum of once a year
Well, what about saying a minimum of once a year up to 4 times a year? That's the truth. Why not put it there?
Well, you can amend the plan up to 4
Otherwise
times a
it's-
year. You could review it
They're
100
different things.
times a year if you wanted to.
Well, Well, I just think that or could, it could be more than once a year as needed, something like that. I think that it's I can't think of the word. It's slanted. I mean,
Bobby, I think that we're getting nowhere with this, and I think that we're gonna discuss it. Wait a minute, we're gonna discuss this next week, and we're gonna vote on it. We're not voting on anything tonight. So if you want to bring this back up next week, then I think we should do it then. But I don't think we're gonna sit here and go back and forth on this.
we're discussing it.
Well, I don't think so. I think we've discussed it, and I think you have an opinion, and I think we've heard Victor's opinion. I don't know if my fellow commissions over here want to offer. Well,
I think at least covers it. I think we start getting you start putting in very detailed specifics in a general plan, then people are watching and saying, wait, has it been 3 times? And I think that you start losing, we're losing ourselves in the trees.
Well, and just
No,
to
I
add
don't agree.
from the staff's perspective, I do not want to mix up or conflate the annual review of the general plan with an opportunity to amend it, because
Right.
those are apples and oranges. They're
Completely.
And I
completely
agree.
separate
Yeah.
processes.
I agree. So
Say
I,
that
I,
again.
So state law says cities or jurisdictions must annually review their general plan by April of every year.
Yes.
So that's a review, that's a check-in. How are we doing? How are we implementing? That's completely separate from the 4 times a year that you're legally allowed to amend your general plan.
How is that separate?
Oftentimes, the review of the general plan doesn't result in any amendments.
Right.
It's essentially a check-in as to how are you doing implementing the
Oh.
policies that are established in the general
It may
plan.
not even happen, but we
okay.
could 4 meetings in a row
Well,
take
this would-
on and vote and pass on to council 4 amendments that have nothing to do with an annual review. There may be 4 different citizens bringing up, I want this change, I want that, whatever, and that's
Well,
mechanical changes to the plan versus analysis of the.
Well, we could call them all reviews. I mean, if that's the language, probably.
But they're not
It's all
reviews. They're
I-
different. Right, because they're not reviews. They're
no,
amendments.
Why?
they're amendments. That's
They're
correct.
Okay.
I think we should drop this now, and I think that this
Did you-
document will be in the packet next time, I believe, Victor, or
Can we clarify what this
Mm-hmm.
packet is? So this packet is a summary written by the 2 of you, which is great.
that
of
we
your-
think that we're just trying to understand where we're coming from, and I think you brought up some good points with the
Right.
verbiage that you use with the chamber.
Yeah, because there's
Okay.
another one on here. So, I mean, that's my question. Do we need to come to agreement that this represents everything, or is
Yeah.
this just one more item entered into by 2 commissioners?
I would
No,
say
I-
that
I'd like clarity on that.
Let's.
I think we were
Victor-
trying
Victor should answer that.
Well, no, and defer to
what I'll
Noah
do.
too, but I think the intent is to capture the commission's direction in one document, and this seems like a nice,
Yeah.
forum to do that because it provides both the proposed wording changes along with the rationale for it. So if the commission can work with this and then utilize that as the vehicle to present the commission's changes, both in terms of us incorporating those into the plan and in moving forward with the rationale from the commission to the council, then I think that's good.
Then
But
if
it's
that's the case,
appropriate
then I think we need to go back and come to agreement if we take a,
Right.
so on
Next
vote
time.
on each point. I mean, like if the case, if it's 4 times a year, I think we need to come to a decision.
But I
take a
think
vote.
we need to do that next during
I
the
think
next
Thought we
meeting
should
after this
discuss
is
it
on in the packet, so the public sees it.
I believe this document could serve as the motivation for the discussion today, as all the points that are identified in the information provided by the chair and vice chair are also identified in the staff report. So I think the discussion is fine, and voting to get clarity on the commission's support for each one can occur today. Staff will then bring back the finalized summary document
Right.
as
So might as well.
a commission provided and supported summary of the general plan recommended
Because
changes.
otherwise, we then have to do it after that.
That's
I mean,
exactly
it'd be
right,
nice to
and-
just say, okay, get through half of it. We
Let's-
agree, we don't agree, whatever, but
Completely.
then it's done.
I think we need to discuss. We need
Okay.
to continue
Yeah.
discussing.
Otherwise,
I
we're
mean-
just doing it again next week, and then we're doing it again after that.
Well, I
Okay.
don't think we get that
Mary,
far.
Yeah,
what- you were gonna say something?
I think the idea was to see if we all agreed this reflected the consensus, and I appreciate your comment about the chamber.
When I have a,
And,
I do
yeah,
too.
and you may
Yeah.
have more, I'm not,
Yep.
you know.
and Bobby may.
I just thought it was helpful to put this in the order that the plan appears, so, and I also think
Very helpful.
I think including the commentary, which is where there may be additional comments from people here, I think it's important for people to understand the context in which we make some of these decisions and what we were looking at, instead of just,
And
a
listening to it.
list.
Well, and let me
So-
clarify. I think it's an excellent
Yeah, I
document.
do
I think it's
too.
a good
I just
summary.
wanna
But if
weigh
it's
in on
going
it.
to be our consensus record, then I think we need
To
to.
really go through
We
it.
can't just say, okay, here you
Right.
go. I think
Well,
we're gonna
I
have to
agree,
go
and
I agree.
that's why we brought it.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we're trying to get this to the point where the staff would get a copy of it and make changes tonight, I guess I would propose that in this periodic updating, we maybe just include in the text that we are putting in here, that something to the effect that this is not intended to prohibit the commission from initiating its own, what word, Noah, not review, of
Amendments?
specific issues during the course of the year,
Thank you. That would-
something.
Let me ask you this, if we had that kind of wording in there, and we got into the discussions we've been with the zoning and the FAR and that kind of thing, could we then use that? Could we use that as a way to get to some of the things that have frustrated us for the last year?
Well, so I mean, there's already the summary from the commission and the general plan itself already provides language to staff to update the zoning code to implement the general plan. And frankly, even if the general plan didn't tell staff to do that, it's a requirement to update all of the land use documents to be consistent with the general plan, which they will not be as soon as this is adopted, based on a lot of the specifics. So staff has to do that. Some of the concern I would say that staff has over the discussion that's currently occurring is we have to do an annual review of the general plan. That comes before the planning commission, that comes before the city council to check in to say, how are we doing implementing this policy direction? Separate from that, there's an opportunity to amend the general plan 4 times a year as a maximum. That doesn't mean you have to amend it at all in a year.
That's right.
But there are legal limitations as to how often you can do it. There are also staff limitations to be able to provide a comprehensive review of what we're doing to the general plan every 4 months or 3 months.
I agree.
We're not going to have a lot of things to update you with.
So
Well, and
it's
if we'd had a rational, I mean, let's face it, the only reason we are micro discussing this is if this thing's been kicked along for a decade. So if this was a rational environment where we annually talked about it, said this isn't working anymore, let's adjust it. Instead, it's become a political dog that gets moved with every new appointment, with every new election, and it never passes. So here we are. So if we try to back up a little bit and not try to get every word perfect and say, okay, here we go now every year, it becomes a matter of course. And I appreciate, Bobby, that because that hasn't happened, there's skepticism. But I mean, I think we as a body have to hold to our responsibility, which is every year and by April, review it. And if there are items brought up by the citizens throughout the year, look at them, amend them, say, sorry, we've hit 4, come back to us next year, and start performing in a predictable, rational way as an entity and our counterparts on the council. We might not be in this situation, but we haven't set that behavior in place, and so here we are.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, what
Yeah.
you're saying. But that doesn't preclude putting some language, and I think Mary's language was maybe less aggressive
Broader
or
is better,
something.
I would argue.
I liked how you put that. I would really like to have
Well,
some indication.
I've scribbled it again because I view these as things that might be sort of like these study sessions like we're having now, where we're free to talk about our ideas and we ask the public to come and tell us what they think. So I guess what I'm proposing, instead of this quarterly review language that's at the end of the comment, that maybe we just add a tag-on sentence that, this provision is not intended to prohibit the Planning Commission from initiating study sessions on specific issues during the course of the year.
Or the council.
it.
Remember, this was the general plan. So
Right.
Just
That's great.
the city should really be what it is, right? Not
I
either
don't
one.
know that well, we can't talk for them.
Okay, to prohibit the
But
the city
But
council.
you're recommending this is actual text to be inserted into the general
Yeah.
plan, so it needs to be brought
Needs
Right,
to say
this was
both,
Victor's
yeah.
text, yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess we're just proposing to add a tag-on sentence and then take that last sentence out of the comment.
I like
That's
that.
good.
Is that all right with you?
Yeah,
That's fine.
I think that was great. On number 2, are we done with number 1? Grace would like it to be done
Well,
with number one.
is-
But
Is
I'm-
everybody agreeable with the
Yeah.
chapter 1?
Yes.
Yeah,
All right,
as-
let's go
as-
through it piece by, let's go
Yeah, and
through
then
it one
if
by
you decide
one.
at some point
Is that
it's too much
okay?
for tonight,
Yep.
but yeah,
As
then we're-
amended by
check.
Mary.
Yep.
On two, I really, I mean, this is what I wanted. I didn't know if the rest of the commission wanted it, but when I was kind of emoting at the last meeting about this language, I want it to say, a comprehensive update to the city's zoning ordinance shall be implemented by the city no later than 3 months after the adoption of the general plan. Now I'm looking at the city's comments. Now, in these comments, I just think it should be, how did you guys put it?
Within 3 months of the
Oh.
adoption of the general plan.
Yeah, well, it says within 3 months of the adoption of the general plan, initiate a comprehensive, okay, so that means it's going to happen.
Well, it means you're going to start the review.
We're gonna
You can't
start.
commit
You're going to
that it's-
stop it. You start it, yeah.
There's no way we could do it in 3 months.
No,
The
no,
whole-
I know that, but we could start it.
No,
Right.
no, we're going to do it in a year.
One, I think to Noah's point, it's a requirement. It's a de facto going to happen. Has to happen.
So if you're
Right.
going to use your language, though, I would want to put shall. I mean, because we have to do that, and someone in the planning department told me, if we don't get what we want in on this adoption of the general plan, it'll never happen. And that's what I don't want to see. I think it needs to be, I'm not saying you did, but someone did. But at any rate, doesn't matter.
It supersedes it. It's a state law, right? I mean, we have to, not state law, but our zoning ordinances have to be in,
All
Cannot
decisions,
It's supposed to be in
conflict.
compliance with our general
Right.
plan, yes.
so the general plan will as soon as it's adopted, the general plan will automatically trump any provisions in the
Right.
zoning code, such as a restaurant seat cap, if
Yeah.
the general plan eliminates it.
right. And the only reason
That's
that hasn't been going on, I mean, it's been going on in bits and starts and fits, but it's because we haven't approved the new general plan. Had that happened, we'd already be doing it.
Right, but I mean, I'm just glad,
zoning.
as long as this language that is proposed here is a definite, it sounds like it's definite within 90 days.
It's started in 90
To start
days.
it. Okay, initiate it, that's okay with me. I
That
mean,
could
I can
be
live
a
with that.
18-month process, but
It's okay, it might be a 10-year process. The way we do it.
You might be
hope not.
closer than the rest of us.
Okay, so.
Is that all right?
Otherwise.
I mean,
yeah.
I think what's important here is maybe being lost in the commentary a little bit. There's been a lot of focus on the medium-density residential district, which spurned the proposed low-medium density district. And we have had people come and make comments to us, either written form or verbally, about McCorkle Avenue, feeling that high density is maybe not appropriate there. And we've got this lengthy piece from George David suggesting that we totally rethink what we're doing along the Route 29 corridor, which has some merit. So,
Cluster zoning, that sort of
yeah,
thing.
I guess that we're probably going to do it anyway. But I thought that this statement of George David has a lot of merit in it, and we have to figure out what the mixed-use district is doing anyway.
and
And
also we haven't really looked at how does that even dovetail into the Highway 29 plan, which exists, right? I mean, that's the whole nother conversation.
It does exist. I would say it's
It's out of date.
fairly antiquated,
But,
so.
but it's still the guiding document, right? And we still, regardless, we
I
still
don't
have
think
to live with it.
I don't think we've used it in years.
I thought that's what's driving. It's not really true. That's why Oak Street has to happen for. Why
the-
all the issues around Dr. Gold's egress.
It is being used and it is
Penn Halls,
driving.
yeah,
It's primarily an infrastructure analysis is essentially what
But
that
it's
document is.
I know I have a copy.
Yeah, but it does affect, certainly at some level, everything that's been happening south of
That's
on
correct.
South Main Street.
That's one way to look at it. Maybe is the new general plan kind of folds in most of the recommendations of that. So specific plan is essentially a baby general plan. It's a targeted general plan for a specific area.
is that the genesis of the mapping of the mixed-use district that we see in the plan now?
No.
I don't believe so.
No, I haven't seen it.
No, but it's driven how, I don't want to say plans, I'm taking out, there's too many words of plans here, but I mean, it's driven how halls have had to lay out their proposal, it's driven how Rodney had to drive out his zoning.
Commissioner Sweeney, excuse me, do you mind speaking closer to the microphone? They can't
The Highway
hear you.
29 plan has guided and influenced how development has been how practically had to be designed along South Highway 29, which has been
On the other side of the
challenging
bridge.
for
yeah.
Right.
folks with properties there.
Right, but, and I tend to think of that more as an infrastructure in relation to the highway kind of concept, whereas I think this concept is more, how many non-residential districts do we need? You know, let's look at them, let's figure out how to map them, let's really figure out what mixed use is going to be. And it's more, in my mind, than taking, I think the difference between the plan, and we probably need some help from staff on this, is that the plan still lists our basic current districts. And I think what we need is the flexibility in the language to maybe collapse some of them together, if that's what we decide to do, or, aggregate some of them, change the mapping, I don't know.
You're talking about the general plan is implemented through the zoning?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, in order to do the kind of analysis and possible change that's recommended in Mr. David's letter, I don't think we want to be hampered by the recitation of land use designation categories that are in the plan and have somebody say, you can't collapse service commercial with this because they were anticipated to be separate districts.
But wouldn't that be a perfect example of applying an amendment? I mean, if we're going through this.
Completely.
That very well
Yes.
could be.
Yeah.
Completely.
Very well could be.
And I think
So
that's
I think back to
Congress'
kind of
seat,
your
yes.
comment here and where I went along with it, it was this idea of adding a low, medium density land designation came in sort of towards the end of a decade-long process. People didn't feel it was fully vetted. There was a lot of other valid and not necessarily valid, but certainly emotionally driven comment around it. And we said, okay, let's table that. It shouldn't be slotted in. Take it out. It's not, of all the things that we've thought a lot about, we haven't thought nearly about this to that level. So let's just take it out and come back at it later again with the idea we can amend later.
Well, I think
So-
we'll have to.
So
after
are
we
you okay
get
with
through
2A as it is written?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, some of the
okay.
commentary I think is interesting. I don't know that that's, I think what I'm taking this as our recommendation is delete the language. This is all sort of backstory with interesting, but won't, and it's record for conversation, but it won't really be in the general
Now,
plan.
could you,
I figured it would go to the
Yeah,
city council so they have some
Yeah.
background.
Yeah, I
But
agree.
it's
So
not
did-
going in the plan.
yeah.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
would this, the way it's written, would that account for taking out that zoning designation, taking it out of the Hunter project? Because, I mean.
No, that's a different thing.
The Hunter project is
It's not.
staying medium density.
Well, it is, so the low medium is not
Yeah,
going to
this
be
was
on the
purely
west
the-
side?
No.
Yeah.
The addition that came in
I mean-
sort of 11th hour.
There are numerous parcels throughout the city which were proposed to be changed from medium density to low medium density.
And that was on the, that was on the,
That came through
that was
public
changed
comment,
in
but
the-
it, yeah.
In the
Well-
land use graphic that shows what uses go where, and the
Yeah.
commission has since directed staff
Oh, okay,
to recommend to the city council that those changes not be made.
okay, so it's all going to be.
Everything medium
least
density
right
will
now.
remain medium density, everything high will remain high, and everything low will
Okay,
remain
I
low.
wanted to make
Yeah,
sure
this
that
was
that
just
included.
not adding this in as
That's right.
as another density designation.
I just wanted to make sure that that was included. It would have been,
All right, so we're on page 3. You've already made you've already made your comments on that. No, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong page. Go ahead.
No, you're right.
We're talking about managing tourism.
Yes, we
And-
already
and you-
kind of.
And you wanted to change there. That's good, and I have no problem with that. Did you get that one, Victor?
Yes, got it.
Okay.
Are there any other comments on 2C for staff?
There's a typo, if it matters. Managing growth is not grown, yeah.
which one?
There's a typo on the third line of manage growth and maintain. It says managing grown and
No, that's
Well,
right.
if this is the commentary is supposed to go to council is to capture our intention and thoughts of the council, I would like then added a line that, and you can phrase however you want to, but the 1993 plan definitely cast a negative light on tourism and had a tourism management element purely from the idea of suppressing and saying that that is a bad thing. And I believe that the current general plan is written in a way that, and I hope it continues to have the position that tourism is part of who we are here, and it is not a bad thing. Management of tourism and growth is fine, but that it should not be that should not then project itself into a negative light, because really the idea behind the tourism management element in the old general plan was because it was a
Absolutely.
bad thing and we had to watch it, or it
And
would
that's why we took it out
right.
when,
And so I
when we
don't
redid
want
it.
to lose that emotion around this manage. So putting the word manage makes perfect sense from a rational standpoint, provided it not be cast in a light that tourism is a bad.
You want to add that language? Where would you add that?
I would just add it in our commentary, because I think what the idea, if I understand it, the commentary here is so that the council reads in context these
Yeah,
changes, why
like-
they made them.
But
Which I
I think what you're saying is the concept of managing tourism doesn't carry a negative.
which it in fact did
That's
by
connotation.
design in
Connotation,
1993.
yes.
It's actually a positive thing. In my view, it's planning, but
I don't think we need to say that, because I don't think we're saying, I don't think we're implying that managing tourism throws any dispersion on
But I
tourism.
think it's the reason it was taken out and the reason that it was changed from the 93 is that the old context was tourism is a bad thing.
Right, but I don't think we need
keep it in
to
a box.
be defensive about it in this. I think this is really clear. I don't think we need to make a particular statement saying we don't, anything about we're not trying to say tourism is a bad thing. I don't think we should say that. I think this is really clear, and I don't think we need to slant anything. It's not suggesting anything. And I mean, it does suggest this, that when you manage something, when you see too many negative impacts, then you're probably going to pull back on anything. So if that is your idea of being a negative thing, of the negativity in this paragraph, I think that's appropriate, because that's what we're talking about, managing
But this was
things and
added in response, which I support, of citizens who came up speaking against tourism, speaking against what the impacts of hotels could be and what guests in our city was and all that. And so the response was, yes, it's fair to say let's manage it also, but we weren't I believe that we were responding to kind of.
Oh, I didn't think it was brought forward by people who thought tourism was a bad thing. I think it was brought forward by people who, at least our voice or whatever, by people who value tourism but realize it needs to be managed just like any other growth, and that it wasn't.
I would
It
say
wasn't
a lot
that
of
they
public
don't want any
comment,
tourism.
particular
In fact,
from
I
Mr.
thought that was
Ellsworth,
specifically
from
said.
Mr. Carr.
What?
Yeah, Mr. Barr, spoke specifically about Los Alcos Hotel. I think I would think that it would be fair if we're going to be representative of the we've said a lot about Mr. David's comments and these other things, so I think to be fair that.
But
So-
there's
so
nothing
I'll just-
negative there.
So so
I
maybe
think it's point of
something
view.
to throw out to the commission.
Yeah.
So I think that the language is excellent as it currently is written for the policy, but possibly for the commentary.
Yeah, I'm only talking about the commentary.
Exactly, I understand. So the first sentence would remain as it is. This recommendation based on recognition the city must manage the growth and change brought by tourism. As such, and then insert language, while tourism brings many benefits,
Yeah,
managing tourism rises to the level of importance of managing growth and the maintenance of community character.
totally good.
I'm fine with that. That's
Me
totally
too.
fine.
I would like to say, well, tourism potentially brings many benefits. I mean, it can be good, it can be bad. I mean, if we're going to talk, and I'm not
Brings many
saying it,
potential
I'm not saying
benefits.
it's either, but that's the
But that's
concept.
exactly why it needs to be inserted, because there is a skepticism that.
Well, it's of
I'm trying
course. That's the skepticism of all growth. That's why there's a planning commission, because growth can be negative. I mean, it can have negative impacts, and who's going to decide? Well, it's tricky. It's complicated. So anyway, I agree
I suggest right now that we use your language
Yeah.
and we'll vote on it next week.
with potential in there.
Yeah, so as such, while tourism brings many potential benefits, managing tourism rises to the level of importance of managing growth and the maintenance of community. Chamber of Commerce and others did not oppose this language.
I'm going to say are not opposed to.
Are
They
not
did come
opposed
out and
to.
say we're not opposed. I think she used that
Yeah,
exact.
Pam did.
I would rather you said that
I heard her
tourism
the other night,
can
she said
bring
the same thing.
Yeah.
benefits. Not, I would say, I think that's better language. I think that captures what you want to say better, that tourism can bring benefits to the,
I think he said
Just-
potential.
I know it, that doesn't, I don't think that has your meaning.
We'll bring back the formal language and
Whatever.
the commission can
I
review
think
it.
That's
and
right.
Have it
Yeah.
in print
That's
in
right.
front of them.
I think that's a
Yep.
good idea. All right, the wineries.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
We did enter, we did add to, this, the winery event centers, and the tasting rooms just to cover ourselves so that, that we were all understood that it was the full ball of wax and not just a little two pieces.
Right. I mean, there definitely is a distinction between a winery that has a tasting center and one that doesn't. So I think it's great to call it out here.
Yeah, and we didn't want to put it just elsewhere because we didn't want, if we ever build a community center, we sure as heck don't want somebody saying, you can't have an event center.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, my impression of what you're just saying here is that those definitions are all unique uses, and they will all be considered case by case in each of the zones, and we would define what you can put in each zone at some point in a zoning ordinance.
Okay, just to clarify, this placeholder on the top of 4, I just inserted that because we had this new June 24th piece from our town, and I didn't know if we wanted to just pass it along or if we wanted to make any recommendations about it. The one that specifically addresses the urban line limit.
Yeah.
I personally thought there were, I would maybe be fine with passing it along with 3 comments that I sort of glean as maybe their issues. One is a concern that things that are farmed but not designated ag, that designating them ag may be inconsistent with both housing opportunity sites and also just natural expansion within the urban line limit. And I think that that's a valid comment that might require some change in this language. There's also a lot of reference in here in the plan to prime farmland, unique farmland. And there seems to be a question of exactly where is this located? I mean, do we know what we're doing based on this?
So those are state definitions. There's a state map that identifies prime farmland of local significance, statewide significance, all those things, and those all have CEQA implications if you're going to convert them from farming activities to other activities, regardless of the land use designation that the city's placed on them.
And so within our agricultural areas right now, do we know which is which?
I think the more important question is within the residentially designated land use
Right,
areas.
that's right.
There are some that are still identified as farmland of local significance by the state, I believe. Victor may be able to add to that.
I mean, by and large, the important farmlands are the lands that are outside of the urban limit line. The bulk of them, there's a few areas that are farmlands of significance. One of which is on the key property site we're looking at. I just blanked out on the name.
Adam Street.
No, I'm sorry. The residential development being
Hunter,
exactly. I don't know why that slipped my mind, but part of the Hunter is shown as prime ag.
What about the Adam Street too? That really old vineyard on Adam. You know, they've got
Well,
all
what does
different
that do to
varieties
this?
and-
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's prime ag or not.
Yeah, by
I don't know off the top of
Adam
my
Street
head.
is not.
I guess the question would be, if you look at this LU5F, what does that mean? And I guess that's what our town is asking. What does that mean with respect to Hunter.
I'm sorry, LU 5.
It says, evaluate rezonings or general plan amendments to determine their potential for impacts on prime farmland, unique farmland, blah, blah, blah. Avoid converting these farmlands. This seems to imply that those can never become residential use.
I think the word avoid is kind of the quibbling word there.
Yeah. I mean, in some cases, they may, are we actually prohibited from converting them, Noah?
No, we have land use designation. We have the rights to designate and convert those lands, but there are CEQA implications to doing so when they're designated by the state.
It doesn't say avoid like the plague. It just says avoid.
But I mean, that language does give direction that those should not be converted.
Well, I think that the question by this piece is, are there already conflicts that we know are out there due to proposed developments or designated opportunity sites? And if so, we should maybe adjust the language.
So I'm giving staff a little bit of homework here, but I think what we should do is review the state map for farmland, definitely as it relates to housing opportunity sites, and then potentially just medium density designated parcels in general, and then we can report back, and then that will provide the commission and ultimately the council a better understanding of how this may affect land use decisions.
Well,
Can I ask a question too? Is this, and maybe it is completely different, but their request to change, these seemed like fairly significant changes in terms of language, and isn't that very much like what we've just decided not to do with the medium densities, like putting in a significant change in the last moment? This would be something, in my view, would come up in review and in the amendment, but to then start down a whole farmland, what's various use of farmland?
Well, it could have
I think
CEQA
that's
implications
just
for
as
the
big
general
a
plan
change as-
EIR.
Pardon?
It could affect the general
Yeah,
plan
I mean,
EIR
I think
analysis.
that this is
I mean,
exactly
this is
what we don't want to do.
Yeah.
In
Well,
this context,
it-
not
it-
that we don't believe it might be a good idea.
Yeah, if I mean, LU5F talks about future evaluate rezonings and general plan amendments. I think, I mean, there are areas that that are prime ag, but they are within the urban limit line. But I believe they already have zoning, so that this policy wouldn't be triggered. For instance, Hunter, they're not looking at a rezoning or a general plan amendment, so this policy wouldn't be triggered by in that case. So I don't see that this one is creating a whole bunch of inconsistencies, but we can, as Noah indicates, we can research that. But given that the triggering is rezoning or general plan amendments and not simply development, I don't think it's a big issue.
In my mind, it's worth passing this along, and I think my biggest comment is to ensure that we aren't designating areas as ag to the detriment of being able to just accommodate our natural growth and our, projected housing sites.
But we're not in the general plan adding new ag zone.
we are not adding any
So that would
existing
be-
or any ag.
I
but
guess that's why I think it's sort of moot.
Well, it
unless
says-
we're-
Let's see.
they're recommend, I mean, they're, that's sort of what,
Well, one of the policies to, see this language, this LU 5.3, where this policy seems to imply that anything that's used as agricultural land, even though it's not designated as it currently, the
mean,
development would be strictly limited.
In that one, I agree. I see that one as being potentially problematic
Right.
because, frankly, that creates legal issues. If you have something that is designated for development and somebody is just trying to get an economic return out of it and plan it discourages people having an interim use of their land. So I would see that as an issue that is worth flagging.
agreeing with that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You do want to strike or use.
I think that makes sense because I think it creates legal issues if you have land that's already zoned for something, and then it creates a disincentive for somebody to plant, let's say, vineyards just to hold to get an economic return on some property. So, and it would be hard for somebody to point to this language legally and tell somebody they couldn't develop.
Just because it was planted.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. That's.
So what I'm hearing is pass along the letter with support for modifying LU 53. And we'll do a little bit of homework and come back with some more information as well.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing I would say is on LU 5C. I think that's understood as not trying to develop preserves for all of the land within the line limit, but some of it, because you still need
Right.
land to develop in the future.
So there are agriculturally designated parcels within the urban limit line,
Yes.
and this would allow folks to move forward with Williamson Act tax benefits and those types of things. That's how I'm looking at it.
But aren't those also there, I mean, again, I hate to always take us off too much course, but aren't those also there specifically for viewshed and for, what is there, we have a name for it in the plan, filtered views or, well, but having ag interspersed with residential was by design. so
Green
there was-
100%.
The green areas.
Yeah, but
Definitely.
there was a name
Absolutely.
for it, filtered view, I mean, there's, I don't remember what it is.
I don't remember the policy
But
language
there is
either,
a
but
name around it.
it is intentional. Agricultural is there's more land dedicated to agricultural use than anything else in the city.
Yeah, but it
It-
wasn't just for farming
no.
purposes, it was for the betterment and view and feeling of, reducing
Keeping the character, the rural character.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a big issue. My major one was LU 53.
yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. Me too.
And so this other comment here, we had this other policy.
Which one are you?
This,
You're
at the
back to-
top
you're
of
back to your
page,
note, right?
yeah, at the top of page 4, there's a comment, and it's really not directed to what we just discussed. It's directed to this other policy, LU 2.6, that I think Mr. David raised. And if I understood this is the one that allows you to develop higher density residential use. It says, I believe, in the medium and high density
Exactly
districts,
correct.
provided it's, of similar character, lot width, whatever, as existing
Exactly.
development, which is a worthy goal. And as I understood his comment, his concern was that if the low medium density district goes in, the only place you can consider these higher densities is in the medium and high, which he thought was too much of a concentration.
Medium opportunity sites and high.
Right, in which case I believe his request was to take this out. So this was just an attempt to capture his comment.
Yes,
I know.
that's correct. If we put the medium low in, then this should come out.
But we didn't put the medium low in.
Right, because
No,
it
but-
was, so
Well,
the
we don't
I
know
comment,
what
think
the
the
council's gonna do.
recommendation is if the council does, this should come out.
I think that's what he's, yes,
Yeah,
that's
it
what
might
he
not be
said
clear in the,
on his
but-
blue memo,
yeah,
okay?
okay.
Oh, but the question of the century is, are you, Victor, are you Vincent?
no, I'm not. No.
Who is Vincent? That's,
I don't believe there is a Vincent. I think it's just a Victor.
There were typos of
My dad's
Victor's
dead,
name
his name was
in
Vincent.
various
He's
places throughout the
gone.
comment.
but who, it wasn't supposed to be Victor? Oh, okay, I
Yeah.
thought so.
So
Oh, I
your
just
comment
needed to
should
check.
then just stay as it is. I mean, I think we just
Stay
leave
it
that,
as, okay.
right? I mean, it says
Right.
what
All
we're
right.
trying
I think that's absolutely correct then.
So my next comes to the,
What are we gonna do? We're gonna leave it in, or we're taking it out?
it's commentary summarizing the intention of Mr. David's letter, which becomes moot if the low density doesn't go
Right.
in, but you're saying if they leave it in, because they still may, then.
Yeah, they may, yeah, for sure.
So my next comment was that the reason that I supported and recommended pushing along Citizens Voice letter to the council was not necessarily because I believed it had merit entirely, but that it warranted because it had enough topics that had public support and there was momentum around that it should go to the council. I think saying that as a group collectively we believe it has merit, I think you could say some members of the council thought it had merit, or, but again, since this is going to be used as sort of their understanding of where, because they probably won't watch all the tapes, maybe they will, but I think it's a very good tool for them, but they should have it in its totality.
Actually, from a staff standpoint, just in looking through this, under A, it says that some language has merit, and then B appears to, at least the way I read it, identify the areas that have merit. I'm not sure if that's the intent, but that's the way I read it.
You know what happened? The second time we discussed citizens' voice was when we really got in the weeds. Actually, we got further in the weeds the third time. But the second time, we went, I think, line by line with their red line changes.
That's correct.
And we actually came to some consensus on a couple of them, which is what B is.
That's correct.
And I felt some of our comments there were worthwhile for consideration. If they're going to take a look at the entire letter, I don't know, would it be better if under A we said it's the consensus that the comments in the letter as redlined and materials presented address important issues?
Yeah, or just warrant the council's
Well,
evaluation.
I think the sentence you've got in there is pretty good.
But I think have merit implies that we're in agreement with all of them. I would say that they warrant the city's
Okay,
evaluation.
all right.
But it implies here that some of them did, that some of the comments.
No,
Several
I think that,
comments. My sense is that
that's
the-
not the intent, Bobby. The intent is that we really liked particularly those comments.
Well, I think that we should take out several of the comments and just say it's a consensus of the Planning Commission that the comments in the Citizens' Voice letter deserve attention from.
Warrant consideration,
Yeah.
or warrant evaluation.
But is that what you were saying,
Yeah, because
Tracy, to
saying
take
that
out?
they have merit, say we unanimously support them, I don't think that's in fact the case.
I agree.
Right.
Okay.
But they do deserve
But I
attention.
think that they warrant the city's the council's evaluation.
Yeah, that's, okay, so that the comments.
But then when you get into B, I think that those.
That's I understand where you're coming from on that. But,
Okay.
Yeah,
but to
you're
say
saying,
in totality the letter,
I agree.
with it, I don't think.
so
fairly
take out the
states.
merit thing and take out,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and we're taking out several of,
yeah.
just that the
take out several.
comments.
Yeah, just that they warrant the city's evaluation, the city
Yeah.
council's evaluation.
Yeah.
It's subtle, but I think it better speaks for it.
Well, it was their request, we would have done a
Right.
detailed analysis, but they wanted us to send it off.
It's because we weren't agreeing with all their stuff.
So, right.
Simple as that.
Well, for whatever. So on B, I don't know if you guys will think this is essential, but from what I've seen on our paperwork and I thought that we should add, the Planning Commission supports the concept of requiring a cost-benefit analysis for development projects in order to assist the city, blah, 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 blah. Included in that analysis will be cumulative impacts, because those aren't always included. And we've had to ask for those separately in the past. So do you think that's,
I think you're then start defining whose cumulative impacts, and I mean, I don't think there's gets back to the definition of the clothing store or of sporting goods. I mean, who's defining what exactly
well, the
that is?
consultant? I mean, the cost benefit, I'm just
Going
saying
back
that,
cumulative back to when, I think I'm comfortable leaving it at this.
Okay.
When you start getting the cumulative impacts,
Okay.
to me, that is the word straight out of.
I think
Well,
that,
those
now
are
2020
being-
or
Well,
whatever.
and
Those
I
are
agree
being
with you because we
required
went through
now,
that
and
over
we've
and
never
over and
had
over
one.
again, and what the cumulative effect
Right.
was going to be on the flood project between here and Calistoga and Napa.
I mean, that's kind of the buzzword of the day, though, is it not? I mean, people are beginning in Sonoma County and all around with respect to the wineries, that they've been doing each one separately, the impacts of each one separately, and the emphasis has not been on cumulative impacts, and it has become, I mean, that's been, especially in this section, that has been what I'm hearing from the public, that they are extremely worried about cumulative
Well,
impacts, and they're not always addressed.
I would think that in this case, that sort of cumulative analysis is almost built in. Like if you're going to measure a project against existing and what's already in the pipeline, I would think that your analysis has to include that traffic that's already in the pipeline. And if you're going to maybe analyze TOT, you're going to look at what's already there, what's in the pipeline? Is this going to add, or is it actually going to rob from,
Well, yeah.
what's it going to do as far as occupancies in the hotel rooms? Is it going to take from somebody else, or do we have capacity to absorb it?
I mean, what you're saying makes absolute sense. The only reason I'm bringing it up is that has not been the case in the past. There have been a lot of these things that did not look at cumulative. We had to go back and ask for cumulative. But if you
But
guys,
I think
if
asking
you
them for
guys
a fund, you're asking them to fund it, or you're asking the developer to fund it. We're adopting something that has been brought up repeatedly and is important, but I think to take it all the way to cumulative impacts is, I'm not supporting
Okay.
taking
All right.
verbiage exactly from
okay.
a very defined citizen group.
And do you think we
putting
need
it
to
as our
put in?
words.
Okay, I mean, I'm okay. I'm not attached to it. Do you think we should also put in that the city should choose the consultant?
I think that was the idea, retain the consultant.
Oh, it says that already. I didn't. read
Yes.
it right. Oh, my
Select.
bad. Okay.
Select the consultant? I don't know.
The city would
The
have.
Maybe select is a better word.
Exactly
Yeah,
the way
you're
the
just trying to
secret
make it
review's done.
non-biased.
That's perfect. Yeah.
City
Be
picks
exactly
them
the
and
way
they pay for 'em.
the secret review's done, Dottie.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
was my
Sure.
reading error. Sorry. Another sign of senility here. That's kind of what getting all this. I had a question. Can I ask you? Can I ask Noah a question about their comments, or do you want to just stick on this?
Let's just stick on this part.
Okay, I'll ask you.
Well, if it's a relevant question. Then.
No, it's just I want mine. It's just a curiosity to me.
So I have one comment. The Planning Commission recommends that the concepts of local serving uses and chain stores be further developed through.
Where are you?
The next page.
Oh, got you.
I have a challenge with local serving, not because I don't support the concept. I think it's a very hard definition, and I think to put in a general plan, I think that's what's gotten us into this challenge where we are today. I mean, so I don't recommend putting that word in. I think the idea of supporting
Local
we went-
serving? I think it's already in there, though.
but that's not in there. We're putting
Isn't
it
it
back in.
sprinkled out?
It was in the old plan. They took out local serving. I
They
thought that
took
was-
out what wording?
We've taken that. I thought we.
There's a lot of discussion of local serving businesses, and they also serve tourists, and
Yeah, but I
I
thought
mean,
we got out of that.
If you look, once again, there's a lot of stuff in here, but if you look at the plan, for instance, under economic diversification or economic sustainability
What's the
chapter, it
page?
says,
What page are you on?
I'm sorry, page 3-10, policy ES 1.5. It says encourage commercial uses that provide basic everyday shopping and services for residents, which arguably is another way of saying local serving. So I mean, there is some of that language in here.
What page are you? Where is that?
I'm sorry, page 310.
But we're not using the word local serving.
No,
That
it's
was our
not.
that word, local serving uses, came out because it was binding in the '93, and it always got people up in a bundle. It always got us confused. There's no definition for it. Who's local? Are you local here because you pay your taxes here? You're not. I think I'd recommend getting away from that and sticking exactly how it is. I mean, because we're
Okay,
talking
well,
about, do
we
we
c-
change it? No, we should not change it. This works.
well, why don't we just take out local serving uses and just say, we recommend that the concepts of encouraging commercial uses that provide basic everyday shopping and services for residences be further developed.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe we're making a lot out of nothing here, but we did go quite a bit into discussing one evening what really constituted local and what worked, and I think Citizens Voice was recommending local ownership or that the employees be local, and
Exactly.
we didn't know if that would work, and
But who's gonna
we
put-
talked about how people can, I think the concept was that people have some reason to actually care about what the business is doing or how it's doing, whether that was because the person who owned the building lived in St. Helena
Yeah,
or.
but I think to put that in a general plan, I just have, I appreciate and like the idea that you've consolidated the discussion points. But again, we're putting on layers in there and assuming, or I think you're projecting that this was unanimous, and it isn't unanimous.
Right, it is for me. I mean, I really support it. I mean, I think the
how do you-
local serving should be changed to, should be worked on
But
to,
it's already been worked. I mean, I guess, again, we're talking about,
I
do we
mean-
change the general plan draft? And
well, I think it's important to put it in the general plan because it gives people who are looking to come here with their
but
business.
they've already addressed it in the economic diversification. What we're saying is, as a commission, do we think they need to redo this with new words?
Well, I
And
think
don't
that was
that's the case.
that was the cry from the public, to my mind, that rather than have a local serving, which doesn't really say what we want people who have businesses here to have some skin in the city, in terms of the well-being of the city, not just in terms of ka-ching. And I think that's appropriate, and that's why even if it's a chain store, or if the people there, the franchise owner and the people live there, and they're gonna have skin in the game to keep St. Helena. I don't think it's out of place to have something said in there. I don't know if this is the right language, and I certainly don't think local serving is the right language. I agree with you totally on that. But to just give a sense of what kind of businesses we want coming in here. We want people to care about the city and the impact that they have on the city from the point of view of being a resident.
And how do you, when they come up against planning commission, actually vet that? I mean, are you saying that? I mean,
Well,
I
that's a good
heard their
question.
letter, and again thought, okay,
That's a good question.
warrants continued discussion, but I
How do
don't
you
think
implement
this.
it? It'd be hard to
I'm
implement.
not comfortable with saying, okay, now in addition to that, we think we should strike this language and replace it with this language. That's not. I mean, again, we'll vote, and I'll maybe
Well-
be outvoted, but
I'm just seeing it as an explore a way of expressing these concepts that we're talking about in a way that would be informative without being directive. I mean, just so, because that's what the general plan is supposed to do.
I think that we got there a little bit around the Sportigo discussion too, is that, we need to have some framework that says, you come here, you do business well, you're rewarded for that over time. But I think that's a whole lot different than starting to define exactly things that were intentionally stripped away from the 1993.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I can
Trying
see,
to layer them back in based on a few.
I can see that the words local serving might be perceived as buzzwords to people that we shouldn't go to. And I'm looking on page 3-11, implementing action ES1B, which does really, it is the one that sort of gets to this idea that we're going to actually update the code to encourage businesses that are complementary to our small town character, provide a range of goods to us, permit non-chain discount type stores. I think that's how we got comments about chains in the first place. Maintain the provisions in the code that prohibit formula restaurants, outlet, and chain discount type stores. I think this is sort of the concept where we got into this discussion. And I'm happy just throwing in some comment here that, like I think you were the one who said, you don't automatically become a chain if you have 2 outlets.
Right.
You're not a national chain. That this is a difficult concept that needs to be defined well so that it works. And that's where we came up with this vested interest in the community.
Which
That's
I
right.
think spiritually is a nice thing to say, but I think from a practicality standpoint, unless then you start having to have a litmus test. Where's
No, I don't.
where-
I don't
where
think
they
that.
live.
I don't think that's necessarily
We
true.
don't,
Otherwise
none
it's
of
arbitrary.
this, a
No.
lot of this is hard to enforce. I mean, it just.
I don't think that's necessarily true.
Yeah, if
Communicating,
I could add just quickly, this is one I think we're going to have to come back to you on. On this vested interest in the community, because I think it does create legal issues. It's one thing to
Sponsor a sports
distinguish
team, I mean, like-
based on the goods that they sell as to whether those goods are focused to the community or to tourists, but the language of vested interest in the community could be problematic legally. So when we come back, we can come back with a little more information on that, but it creates a little bit of concern in my mind.
I don't know that it's a legal problem in the plan. It's a sort of a overarching concept to be developed in the zoning ordinance as to exactly what it means. But the idea was that it was important that some of our businesses, like Bobby just said, have skin in the game, or they've been here, or they're owned by somebody who's here, or
But don't you
It-
think
it-
that
it may-
happens in the context of our discussions of any particular use permit? I mean, we're gonna
No.
Sportigo's a perfect example. I mean, the reason why everyone went to bat for them is because they have vested interest. They've proven themselves here, and so if we'd have gone to the letter of the zone or the law, we would have never overturned what Noah said. But so I think that happens in the context, but to put it in the general plan, to me, seems more confining.
Well, we
Well-
put it in the general plan not to have chains, and I think the reason that we don't want to have chains is that when you have chains, the money, first of all, the corporate headquarters are not in town, so it's like, we're the colony here. I mean, and the resources are going out of the town. They're not going back into the town because if the people working there live in the town and are getting their paycheck, they're going to spend money in town and they're paying, that kind of thing. That's why we don't want chains. But if you have privately owned stores where nobody in the business has any really care about St. Helena except for how much money they can make here, it's the same kind of
But I think
effect.
you can make that same argument.
Well,
A
hold
chain
on.
that employs
Let me
local
finish.
people,
Let me finish.
they're
Let me finish, though. I mean, all I'm saying is that putting no chains in the general plan, that's in the general plan. I think what we're trying to do is, and no other kinds of stores that are going to be like chains and not care about what's going on in St. Helena, what their impact is in St. Helena. That's all. I think it is appropriate to be here.
I wouldn't necessarily say no other stores, but for instance, one way I could see this playing out in the plan might be the review procedures or a fast track approval or something like that that would somehow apply. And granted, it takes work. It takes using this non-tourism thing that we've been struggling with in the existing zoning ordinance and turning it into something that we can actually grasp and measure when we evaluate things. But I think we want to work to retain our local businesses that we value, and we want to do what we can to get more businesses like them in town.
We can just say encourage. I mean, we're not going to say require or anything, but just encourage.
So I can add a suggestion. So obviously there's a little bit of difference of opinions on the commission. So I have a language suggestion that I'd like you to listen to, and then if you don't like it, maybe we could just do a vote and then get a rather than trying to get a consensus, we can just get a majority. But one change could be the Planning Commission recommends that the concepts of retail stores be further developed through definitions that recognize and support businesses that have a vested interest in the community. So that's one way to kind of, I think, get to some of the crux of what some commissioners are saying without throwing out the specific buzzwords. I think local serving, was specifically removed from the former general plan through the review process. I think that was intentional. So the council may not be supportive of that based on the past history, but at the same time, I think there is some support to further look at how we define some of these stores, especially given that Sportigo is a great example. So that's one recommendation that staff could have. If that's not supported by a majority of or by consensus or a majority, then maybe we could just go for a majority vote and see if where the commission sits.
You know, I find retail stores a little too limited. I would almost prefer to say like business uses, because there can be service businesses in town that people, really value. Or, I mean, I see where you're going with it.
we let title companies that are national. I mean, we're completely inconsistent in that regard.
No,
Well, you
because if the
can't have a
people are-
local
if the
title
people-
company.
If the workers are vested here,
Yeah,
that's
but
what
so
we're
are
talking
the
about.
best. If you open, I mean, not that we're going to open a Gap, but if you open a Gap tomorrow, the employees are going to probably be high school kids living here. And
But
so
it's
that's no
specifically
different than a
no
title
chains.
company.
There are no chains.
So the title company are chains. I mean, so I think that we've gotten ourselves, we've gotten hung up on things
don't think
that aren't doing what you're trying to do, which is have people care about the community. So build that in other ways.
Well, we're not trying to get people to care about them. We're trying to make a general plan that expresses what we would like.
Well, that
It may or may
general plan
not,
then
it's
being
not a
read by
directive.
Companies deciding,
Yeah.
are they going to move here?
One at a time, please.
And that's my point. And I think they should have a good sense of what we're looking for. And I think that's what the general plan can give them. We're saying no chains, but we're saying, I don't, that inconsistency, well, obviously you're not convinced. So, okay. So maybe we just need a.
Well, we
majority
need,
vote.
we have to vote on this next time with Sarah anyway, but maybe this language in ES1B, we're going to update the code to encourage.
Can I back up? What is so wrong with this language? Maybe we start there and I can better understand.
No, I think it's good. I think we should maybe what this concept is doing is amplifying it. Encourage to the extent feasible businesses that are complementary to St. Helena's small-town character and that provide a range of goods to local residents.
That's what it says, right? I know.
I guess the only thing I would,
That's exactly what it says right now. So to start putting in more fences around it makes it harder. If you are a
What is
business.
complementary to St. Helena?
But I mean, look how difficult it was for Sportigo to determine what's the right answer. You're now some other business trying to be here, and you have, your little ice cream shop in Petaluma, and you decide you're going to open one here, and you start reading this. I mean, the more we have papered up windows today. I just
what
think
is
that to make it
complementary to
harder and more difficult. To me, that reads good. I'd leave it alone.
well, it
What
still
is
does say
what is
encourage to the
complementary to
extent
small town?
feasible, which looks
One
forward
at a
to
time, please.
when you actually have to put the pencil on the paper and come up with the regulations.
I don't recommend changing this. I think that's well written. And
But
it says it all.
I'm just curious, why do you think that that's any clearer, complementary to small-town character than any of the other things we're
Because
talking
I'm
about?
approaching this, unless we're a heck of a lot clearer, we shouldn't change what's already here. There's a lot of work and investment in this. I think it's well written, and I think
But it's not responsive to a lot of the public. I mean, we're trying to be responsive to a lot of what the public has been telling
we're
us
being
and a lot of the public
responsive
input.
to a lawyer letter from Farr, and bless his heart, but I'm not saying that's exactly what some of these words are coming from. That's my impression, and so I think that this reads well. And I think in many cases, we have taken a lot of what they said, and we're recommending those changes. But I don't think this is one that I can support. I mean, we're going to vote, but I just don't see that is the one I think this starts stirring up, now we're just going backwards.
Then, I respect your perspective.
And I think we've taken a lot of what these groups have said and incorporated them. But this is one area I think it's well written as it is. So can we vote?
We're going to vote next time, or do we?
Well, so yeah, I think we are going to vote next time. But I think the question staff has is: should we change the language that's written here in the summary of the commission statements or not?
I like what you had with the taking into consideration.
Well, summary should say that
Leave
it's
it the
not a
way we've
consensus
written
then.
it, and we'll vote on it next time.
But keep your language somewhere.
In the
Retail
meantime,
stores and
Victor, maybe you can
service
find some better language.
Yeah, I would think that one thing for sure we would want to add to ES1B is the concept of business retention. I don't know that the plan talks about
Yeah, that I
about that.
but that's a whole different thing.
That's the second part of what we have here. And I guess we can all think for a couple weeks about
How best to do that?
local businesses and vested interests. And
Well, we can try to come up with some wording here that gives maybe a couple options to look at. I agree. I think business retention is something that could be clearly added to this, which is not addressed. Beyond that, just based on discussion, I think there's different opinions. So, but we'll come back with some alternate wording.
You can get that one of these
So
days,
where
too.
to go now?
Okay, let's go on to the next item then.
Which is C?
C.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, Victor, this is apparently something you've been discussing with Mr. David. I'm fine. I think policy that's already in there that talks about directing these uses to an upscale market and discouraging development directed at mass tourism kind of captures the concept. One time you did give us some very specific
Right.
hotel criteria, which seemed to me to be a little too specific to be in the plan. So I don't have,
I agree. I don't think it could be too
you
specific.
know, I I'm willing to leave it as it is and let Mr. David take his arguments, to the
Are
council.
you talking about ES1?
I'm talking about C on page 5.
You're saying leave ES 2.2 as it is.
Yeah, I think we
which
already
was-
said we supported leaving it as it is.
Yes.
Okay.
You know what I was thinking? What if you looked at ES1.b? Oh, no, excuse me, ES1.f. And if all you said was such incentives shall not include consideration of visitor serving uses in medium density or, I mean, just adding not there, wouldn't that cover what George was looking for?
Well, I think that's D. That's D,
Oh,
and
that's-
I
I'm
think
sorry.
I think we already discussed it once and sort of agreed to strike some of the language to make
Right.
it clear.
Right.
I'm sorry.
But we also made it, that made it clear.
No,
Oh, yeah.
Because I think it's fine the way it is.
I guess I just have one question about this. Is this whole concept just limited to visitor serving businesses?
The intent behind this, and Victor can jump in here, but I think it's to somewhat establish a beauty contest between larger scale developments so that the community can get the most benefit from approving one. So while often planners tend to discourage that, in the case of having a finite amount of land and essentially, there's a big push for larger developments to help the economic stability of the community and address some of the needs of the community. However, at the same time, occasionally, and there's a good example, there's an approved hotel that hasn't been built, but because that's approved, then it gets utilized as a justification for not looking at another potential project. So the idea behind this was to provide some very specific kind of a floor to expectations the community will have for these larger scale projects coming forwards to make sure that they do really provide benefits to the community, which I think was trying to get through with that cost benefit analysis and those types of things. And
I think
Victor,
that's
don't know if
very
you wanna
important.
Yeah, if I could just kind of add, I think if there's a problem with this language, it's that it just speaks to visitor serving generally, and frankly, in some ways, given the wording, it may run a little bit afoul of the concern that was voiced by Doug and by others about, Coach and Burberry and all those folks coming in, which obviously doesn't fit the local serving. I think the language that George, David, and I were talking about was more just focused on trying to describe hotels and specifically make it clear what the city is looking for. I would agree with you, Mary. I think the criteria I verbalized at that one meeting was probably too detailed, but perhaps a policy that simply focuses on hotels, or maybe it's a subset of this. I don't know, but so I think that's the distinction, and what we're trying to do is Noah says that create this sort of beauty contest that for hotel folks coming in that they will have to hit this very high bar and make that clear at the outset. And perhaps the wording under this ES 2.2 is a little, because it's all visitor serving, arguably might be a little broad.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at ES 1F, where we struck out the language to clarify that we weren't talking about locating those uses in residential districts. And my question is, the concern here is affordable and workforce housing. We're either going to have incentives, or they're going to be viewed as requirements. And does that only relate to new visitor serving businesses? Does that pretty much capture?
Are we on
So that would
applicant?
be like a winery operation or event center or a new hotel?
That's correct. The idea is that those folks, oftentimes the employees may not live in town that work there, and so they add additional impacts separate from just the visitors serving, but also employees and all those things. So I think the idea was to force them to offset some of the impacts from their uses by providing those other features.
Yeah.
And that they had high concentrations of low-wage employees relative to other businesses.
Yeah, I guess I would be happy to say, though, new visitors serving businesses and other businesses in general that are, the issue is bringing the employees up and then they don't live here and they, my question is, why
Bring
are
them
we
up and
restricting
train
it to
and make
that?
everybody
That's the
really
only
angry.
kind of use that we imagine is gonna bring enough employees that we should look at this issue?
Well, I think there's two problems. One is the one that you discussed, and the other is simply, right now the wording makes it sound like we could end up with hotels in the residential areas,
Right,
which we
that
want to
I think
avoid.
we fixed.
Okay, so we fixed
beyond
that.
that, the question is, should this be broader than just visitor serving businesses?
It-
I think
Are they the only
context-
ones that bring employees to town? Suppose we have a new grocery store.
Well, I think the context is important. So this is under sustainable tourism implementing actions versus, so tourism is related to visitor serving, so that's why that language
Okay.
is specific there. I think if separate from that, there could be another broader policy that incentivizes development of workforce housing for any type of business.
Maybe it's in the housing element, which is not at my fingertips at the moment.
Can I go back to ES2B?
Sorry, I'm making us digress here.
Oh. I'm wondering, should we add at the end of ES2B, just to add, consider a cost-benefit analysis for all new lodging facilities?
We covered that.
We already did? When? Oh, did I do that before or something? I'm so sorry.
You know, one of the things, Victor, I think that the cost analysis, if we do cost analysis on hotels, and we've got a new one coming online supposedly very soon, and if Ted gets his, then maybe we do a cost analysis on a fancy hotel, and we're not going to fill these hotels up.
Right.
And then they're going to be in trouble, and so I think that's going to eliminate some of the concern over hotels, particularly with if we've got two coming online here, and they got 3 new ones coming online in Calistoga and 2 new ones, big ones coming online in Napa. I think that we really need to look at these hotels before we start building them.
No,
You talk about having empty, you talk about empty windows.
I agree. I think the language, I prefer the broader language which describes the study, and then we can, add exactly what we want to identify. And I think Commissioner Koberstein, you mentioned that issue before, one hotel cannibalizing the other. So clearly we would need to look at that. And but I think the important thing is to get, this cost-benefit analysis, for any big project coming in.
I think so. And I also think that, that we don't want to make too many changes to this plan and keep delaying this plan, or 6 months from now, we're going to be in the same boat that we're in right now. This has been going on since 2006, and I guess we could change it every other day, every time something different happened.
Yeah, I sort of view Mr. Hall's project as maybe the first one that goes through a cost-benefit analysis. I mean, he hasn't officially applied.
That is a long way from coming online. I mean, I'm talking about like we have this hotel coming online. We don't have a hotel.
Yeah, I mean, we got one coming out. We have one coming online,
Right.
and
I'm wondering,
a long time ago, I made a note about what, the plan still talks about Vineland Station, and we received a sort of a lengthy letter, and I didn't know what that meant as far as the language that's in the plan about that development. Is that accurate still?
I don't remember the specific language of the letter you're referencing, but Vineland Station has a development agreement that allows its entitlements to remain in place.
for 20 years.
It was a 10-year DA, and it goes, I want to say to 2020, but maybe beyond. I don't. So
Thought he was going to
It's at least to
that.
2020.
at least to 2020. That's correct.
Can I ask a question about ES2A? I don't know if you.
You know, Bobby, we're discussing this tonight,
Yes.
and we discuss the rest of this next week.
Okay, so you don't want to do that?
No, I think we've gone through all this once, and now we're starting through it a second time again, and I don't
Gotcha.
think,
Yeah, and I actually would say we've gone through it multiple times. The concept of this was that you went back through,
Commissioner Sweeney, your microphone, please.
that you went through 3 study sessions, right? 3 study sessions, and this is a recap. Overall, a
how
very
good it is or how bad it is,
very good
it is a
I
recap,
think it's
you
a
know?
very good recap. There were a few things that I found exception with because I didn't think they fairly stated the conversation. However, to start over again, what Bobby's wanting to do is now let's start on these other points. I think that's
I think we're past that point.
we're past that point.
We're past that point, and I think one of the things that I hear
Yeah.
is that we're to get this general plan out of here.
Okay.
And I hear
That
that
is a
from,
good
I
thing.
hear
That
that
is
from
not a
more
bad
than
thing.
one person on the council.
Okay,
Is that
but-
not correct?
I just want to, I mean,
And the citizens. I mean, I arguably we have a vocal group who comes and visits, but we represent 5,000 citizens, and
And
most of
that's-
them are stunned.
And that's one of the biggest
we don't have it.
questions I get is, when are you guys gonna finish the general
Right.
plan?
okay, but I want to just point out that ES1B is referenced in here. That's why I was going to talk about it.
We've already talked about that.
The one that we are
Something else to say about that?
working on, and Noah's going to give us some language, and we don't have a consensus on that one.
Yeah.
Oh, ES1.
And
We almost voted and then agreed to come back.
Yeah, we have to, but,
Yes.
but what I'm saying
Oh,
is that to
ES2A
sit
is
here
also here,
and
though.
start going through this general plan,
No.
we're not gonna do that.
No.
Absolutely not
Okay,
gonna
but
do that.
ES2A is also in here. It's in this, and that's why
And
I
Noah's
was
coming
going to
back,
it.
taking those two
No,
ideas.
not for ES2A too, because I just,
Yes, he's got ES 1B and 2A, right?
It's all kind of part and parcel, isn't it?
They're together.
they somewhat address the same issue.
Yeah.
That's on the top of the page.
No, I have direction for the initial portion of that ES1B. If there's concerns over ES2A, then I'd like to hear now so we could try to have a
I just thought
full.
that, yeah, I thought that maybe we could just add, I didn't know if you wanted to continue to prohibit formula restaurants, chain, and retail discount stores. I don't know, and then to add at the end, consider destination membership clubs and other potential lodging options that contribute to the transient occupancy tax revenue stream that do not negatively impact neighbors and neighborhoods. In response to some of the, adding that.
I think there's numerous other policies that talk about that.
Yeah, no.
Why can't it be in the implementing action?
I'm not saying it can't. I'm just saying I think there's numerous other policies that support that, and I would just look to the commission, the rest of the commission.
Why would you not want it there as well? If there are numerous other ones, why not have it?
Because you're getting very specific again. You're starting to talk about, you
It's-
just mentioned fractional.
That's not, I mean, look at what's in there, 10,000 square feet, it's specific all over the place.
Is the consensus of the commission, or should we take a vote that we should modify that language as well?
Can you repeat
I don't think
exactly
so.
what you're proposing,
What
Bobby?
I was proposing is that we add that, consider destination membership clubs and other potential lodging options, because lodging is such an issue, that contribute to the TOT revenue stream that do not negatively impact neighbors and neighborhoods. That
don't
was the
think we want-
language that was
I don't think we want
repeated many
timeshares here.
times, but.
I do think there was another, I can't put my fingers on it, policy that talked about tourism or lodging businesses and their effect on community character.
That's what
But I
was
think
wondering.
that was already struck down. That balloon got floated by the council and was taken out. The
That's
idea of
right.
I just think
looking at hotels.
I think it's really a
Well-
nice thing, as a clear thing to have it really communicates that we care about the neighborhoods, and in the general plan and the rest of it,
All
it
right,
talks
then,
about.
then
neighborhood
Bobby, you can bring that up
preservation.
when we discuss other things next week.
Well, that's
Right
on
now,
here.
I understand that. I understand that it's there, but I'm gonna tell you that I think that Noah and Victor, I'm gonna call you Vincent,
That's all right.
well, and we've made our comments.
Oh, do you
and-
have direction?
It doesn't appear that it's supported by the body of the commission.
Can I just ask, at the liberty of, or at the risk of getting
It's getting stronger.
Yeah.
It's all right.
I'm just curious why
That's
the
not heavier
only,
than a glass of water.
why the only chain store addressed in these two implementing actions is chain discount. There's nothing here about chain per se, only chain
Because I
discount.
think it was getting back to the idea that a high-end, multi-unit business is not by definition bad. What makes it bad is if it's
But it,
changing the image, if it's someone. if
It's low class.
Not low class, but I think that the idea of someone coming in here, for example, when there was going in with the discount pharmacy, was that it goes against the other businesses because they can't compete on price. Because a big chain discounter can put them out of business, but the idea that just because there's more than one unit doesn't necessarily make them bad. What made them bad is if they by statute of their ability to buy in mass and discount was hard on the other local retailers. I.e. when we used to have who was the
Let's send me the box store.
I understand that too. I just,
forget who went out of business. It was
I just thought we had a lot of discussion about chain stores in general, not just discount chain stores, but,
That could be directly out of the zoning code, trying to maintain current zoning prohibitions, because the zoning code does have that similar language.
okay, well, I guess we'll resolve this when we,
business or different things.
that's what got us to the vested interest in the community.
All right, can we go on to C?
Deal with it. You can hit me with that thing now.
What?
She wasn't paying attention.
I don't hear things I don't want to hear, Bobby. I have selective hearing.
Yeah, so staff heard on C, leave the language as currently proposed and let the city council decide what staff's direction was on C. And then D, the commission is supportive of that.
Yes.
Yes. Supportive of this change.
Of the changes, that's correct. Does that conclude the review of the summary of the planning commission's comments?
I think we should do it over again in case we miss something.
I'll watch the tape. Thank you very much, Chair Kistner and Vice Chair Koberstein. That was very helpful for staff to provide a thorough summary, and it's much appreciated.
You mean for the commission?
For the entire commission to provide a thorough summary, but for the two chair and vice chair to take the time to summarize their points for our edification and
said staff.
discussion point.
Well, we thought we were being helpful. We hope we were
Very
being
helpful.
helpful.
Very helpful. If an electronic version could be provided to staff, that'd be much appreciated, and we will post it for the public's full review and bring it back next meeting for a summary consensus vote on the changes.
And that you'll make the changes in it, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I think there's one typo that I'll fix, but otherwise.
I'm really glad that she types so well because I'm still
Okay.
hunting and pecking
Okay.
with this.
What do we have now, a department report?
Department
Yeah, I
report,
have
so
an
I'll
arm
keep
map.
it brief.
But I'm
The
not able
EIR
to use
comment
it.
period ends on Monday, the 25th. That's an important date for the council and the commission. The EIR, general plan EIR comment period ends on the 25th. And I did update the agenda forecast, so that's a good document. There are a couple, there's one, in the active pending projects, there's one duplication of the projects, and there's one that was approved, 1645 Vineyard.
1645, yeah.
Thank you. But just generally, staff is extremely busy right now. We have approximately 25 applications in process, ranging from a sign to a new winery. And we have several applications that we're expecting to be filed in the near future, including a subdivision on Pope Street, including a hotel being proposed at 1000 Mills Lane. So staff does have expectations for some significant projects to be filed in addition to what we're already working on.
Could I ask one question around that? At one point, I don't remember when you were giving us kind of timeframes, you said that, like for a use modification, it was about a 60-day. If everything was turned in correctly, they could do it in about 60. What is that? Given all that, what is that? Is that still if it's filed in?
I'm telling applicants right now they should anticipate a 4-month
month now.
from submittal to planning commission review just based on essentially staff workloads and our ability to get to
And
their
that's
proposals.
if they have all their ducks in a row.
100%. But that does also anticipate some back and forth that's typical for every project.
Right.
One element that staff would like to point out, especially in light of some of the new policy direction that could be coming out of the general plan, are the things that the city council and the planning commission have already assigned to staff to work on. So it's important to identify that currently the staff is beyond just individual project review. Staff's working on the general plan update and the EIR. We're working on the Hunter subdivision, which is listed, but that's a significant project. We're trying to get the EIR finalized so we can post that for public review and comment. In addition, we're trying to manage the RFP review and response process. So those are out. The 2 RFPs are out. And the city will be extending the review, the response period for the RFPs by 2 weeks. That will occur tomorrow. It's going to be formally posted on the website. There was a noticing error, and so not everyone who was intended to get the RFP was notified of it, and so staff is going to push that back 2 weeks to accommodate that. We also have direction to work on design guidelines. That city's already committed to that. That direction's already been provided. There's also direction to bring back growth management to the city council in September. Commission has directed us to work on the design review submittal requirements, look at demolition permit review. We have ongoing code enforcement situations. So just be aware, and within that, we're also going to be doing the comprehensive zoning code update. So be aware that there are significant amounts of work already assigned to staff, in addition to some of the policy directions that could result in more assignments for staff to work on. And while we're happy to do all this work, we do not have any resources to hire additional consultants to bring on to supplement our work. So just be aware of that, and that's something that should be thoughtful in expectations.
Can you explain what the growth management thing that you're going to give to the city council in September is?
Well, the code says to present an update on growth management every September to the city council.
Oh, okay.
However, the growth management currently, as was presented to the planning commission last summer, and I think it was last fall actually, says that we're going to issue all allotments on January 1st, which we can't do. So at a minimum, staff is going to be fixing that, but there are other elements that staff will present a menu to the commission and the council with for other revisions that could be made. They could be too broad and frankly too convoluted with regards to all the other processes that are going on to be implemented this year. But there are some ideas regarding getting back to kind of a beauty contest that Victor and I have been talking about. So should we hold allotments to projects that are deemed to have most community benefit? I mean, there's a lot of ideas that you can utilize to manage your growth and also get the most benefits from your projects that could be implemented. That's all more work and more complication.
So this isn't the general plan growth management chapter. This is something else.
They are all interrelated, but the city council or the city has a growth management ordinance that limits the maximum number of building permits for new units to 9 per year.
Gotcha. Okay.
The housing element talks about that. The growth management of the general plan talks about that. They're all interrelated, but this is a specific growth management ordinance that staff has to bring back to the city council every year in September, and it's frankly broken. It is unimplementable the way it's written.
So it's an ordinance. Okay.
I have a question, and I'm wondering if we could explore this as far as your workload. It strikes me that a lot of the things that come through to us on the consent item just zip right through, and there's a fair amount of staff work put into that material. And I have 2 questions. Is there a way to consider bringing us a mini description of the item that we could initially just pass on without you having to spend all the time and the applicant having to develop all these plans and everything? I think that would cut down on your workload a bit. But I'm also wondering if that runs afoul of what always happens at our meetings when we always ask the public if somebody wants. But could we have could we have a pre-decision where the public could also say, take that off, and then you would run with the full-blown, report? Because you must know weeks or months in advance of when we see it that, this is coming and it's likely to be a consent item.
We can identify consent items versus the higher level ones fairly easily, and staff is very supportive of a reduced review process for those, maybe a memo versus a staff report, consolidated presentation materials. They're very supportive of that, and thank you for suggesting it. Some of those will have to be implemented through the zoning code update because there's no process described as to how that can be done. But if the commission was supportive of that, maybe staff will review or will try to provide some direction as to how we can do it. I was actually thinking about doing that with the Allen project that's going to be coming back to the commission, given that you've already heard it, it's been continued. Staff was considering just preparing a memo identifying the commission's direction to change and then just providing the plans and
Yeah, I think that would be sufficient.
I
But-
would
be a test case so that the commission can think about it.
I just immediately, I don't like that idea. I think it's really important. You don't know when the public might want to pull something. They might know something. We don't know. We might want to pull something. And even the thing you're talking about, maybe the public has something else to say about it. Even if we all agreed, and we wouldn't be able to hear that necessarily. And
No, I'm not suggesting that they don't have the opportunity to take it up, but what I'm suggesting is we see it earlier in a more abbreviated form that gives you the important information you need to know to say, I want to discuss that further. I want, the full-blown plans, the time and the expense of preparing them versus,
But how can you really know if you want to pull it if you don't see? I don't know about the plans, but if you don't see the whole staff report, it's important for
well,
me to see it anyway.
I think some of them appear on consent by virtue of the fact that the size of the project is so small, or, 100 square foot addition or something, or,
Yeah, the one
Right.
today, and I realized I meant to pull that because, and for this reason, it was a pool. They were adding a pool house, and I didn't know if there was already a pool house and they were making a bigger one. If this was a brand new thing, and if so, did it make a lot of noise? Because we had, and I know it was isolated, but there were houses. I meant to ask that, and I didn't, and I meant to pull it for that. I just wanted to make sure that the noise issue, because it came up last time in a completely different context, but still. I was out in the country, and there was a house. I looked at it, it could have been in earshot. So I just wanted to ask. So I don't know if I would have gotten enough information from the kind of abbreviated format that you're talking about. So
Well,
maybe
staff,
no
staff
plans.
will schedule, we'll experiment with it with a memo on a continuance, and then we can maybe schedule a discussion item for the commission to talk about some of the ways that we might be able to improve our efficiency in reviewing certain level of projects.
But the public will still have a chance
Well,
to.
like I said, we'll schedule it, and then the commission can provide, as a body, their direction and concern, and then we'll use that to formulate the policy.
yeah, and if it appears on the agenda as, projected consent items, it's there on the agenda for the public to see. And that would be their time to object too. That they could trigger it or we could.
Would there be a full report online that you could look at?
It goes on, at some point, I think there has to be some notice to us that, I'm just making this up as I'm going, that the staff has, 20 projects in the pipeline, and 6 of them are likely consent items, and here they are. And if we agree, somehow those 6 come to us on our regular agenda, with an abbreviated description, with the opportunity for anybody in the public to say that shouldn't be a consent item, or for us to say it shouldn't. And then they move.
happen in your meeting that you have the agenda meeting?
No, the agenda's all set and the work's all done.
That's exactly, we don't, the agenda, we meet Thursday before Tuesday,
Yeah, I
so.
don't mean, that's not the agenda meeting, maybe a different, but I mean, in the context of speaking with chair and vice chair, can't you vet some of those?
Except some of the processes are dictated by the zoning code, which didn't allow it. But we're getting a little bit off topic and a little broad for the agenda, but we will, I'm very supportive and thank you for bringing that up. And as I mentioned, we'll maybe try a format out with the continued item on Allen. And then we will schedule a discussion item with the commission to create a policy direction, and then we'll utilize that to build on it.
Yeah, I certainly think in the case of a continued item, we don't need another full-blown staff report with all the,
Except
only
I
the
guess
new stuff.
I guess the public always needs to be able to see it all.
We would, of course,
And they
attach
might be
this.
coming in late. I don't know. I just think it's important.
We would, of
for
course,
the public
attach the
to know.
staff report that was previously done in an issuance of a continuance.
Oh, okay.
So all the information would still be there. It's
and it'd
just-
be online too. I mean, that's my main concern is that the public have that information.
Let me ask you this, what's on the agenda for next time? Do you have that? You don't
I should, because it's actually all due tomorrow.
I looked at your list and I thought maybe we're not going to have a meeting.
Now, it's all, the public hearing notices are all due tomorrow, and we have several projects which have the potential to be listed on the agenda, but some of it depends on applicants, some of it depends on staff's ability to get to them. But
So we're not going to go through the general plan next time again, or are we?
we're going to bring back the summary next time for the commission to review, to make sure that we have a consensus on the commission direction to council, and that should streamline the future review of the general plan by the commission.
We'll get rid of the following week.
Exactly. And then we will, in addition, have several projects. I don't think it'll be a large agenda, but I believe there will be a couple projects on it.
I do have an agenda about the general plan.
Is the RFP available online for anybody who wants to look at it?
Yeah, that's correct. There's a web page on the city's website under the planning department. So you just go to city website, go to planning department, and then on the right there's an RFP link, and it goes to a page that has both RFPs on it, all of the supporting documentation which are referenced in them, all of those things.
So is there any problem pointing that out to other developers?
Please
Was
do.
the idea to have a invited list, or?
Well, the idea is to cast as broad of a net as possible.
Okay.
So staff put together all of our resources, people who have indicated interest in the past and all those things. And the notification list is also going to be made public. We're just trying to finalize it, and due to the noticing situation, it's not
Okay,
quite public. yet.
thanks.